Stubborn. How to Turn Stubborn from a Bad Word to a Good Thing for Your Family Business by Caygeon Junkin. Narrated by himself. Dedication. It is the soft issues that become hard problems in a family business. 30 years ago, I would have told you that was BS. As a result, I went through a lot of BS working with my family because I was wrong. This book is dedicated to hard-working business owners who rarely get time to read a book because they are too darn busy working their butts off to keep their families and family businesses together. I wrote this book so that all that hard work is not all for nothing.
The Preface. Since he was 9 years old, he always signed "of Bob Caygeon" after his name on any test or legal document. Bobby was intensely proud to be the 7th generation to farm in Bob Caygeon. His name didn't matter. Where he was from did. If you were to fly north over Bob Caygeon, you'd see a one-stoplight town situated on 3 islands between 2 large lakes to the east and west. And Bobby's farm bordered the northern edge of the town with tiny green hay, wheat, and cornfields with picture-book stone fence lines that made the landscape look like a patchwork quilt. Bobby's family farmed the last cornfields before the ground turned into sheer bedrock and cedar swamps in the Appalachian-like region called the Canadian Shield. If you have ever been fishing in northern Ontario, this is where the Canadian wilderness starts. Stubborn family pride kept them farming the stony ground that their ancestors cleared back in 1832. Western Ontario farmers driving to their cottages in Bob Caygeon often dismissed their family as fools for trying to grow corn on such rocky soil. But his family were known as proud, hardworking, and stubborn people. What caused his family to be able to farm this stony land for 7 generations was the fact that they were proud and stubborn. What caused them to fail in his generation was that they were too proud and were stubborn with each other. Nearly everyone in Bobby's hometown was his cousin, and the joke growing up was he had to go off to the University of Guelph to find a wife, rather than pick up a wife at a family reunion. Bobby's seemingly ideal childhood was given a swift kick in the pants when he decided to head off to college. A farewell and good luck would have been welcome, but Bobby left his hometown with a crushing ultimatum. His mom revealed to him that the farm was losing money quickly. "If you don't fix these numbers," she warned him, "I'm leaving your father." Bobby's mission wasn't just to earn an agricultural degree and find a wife. He had to find a way to save his family's farm. In the final semester of his agribusiness program, the students were assigned to write a business plan for their home farm. But Bobby approached the professor for guidance in his first semester and started working on it long before he was required to. Bobby went to class to meet girls, but he spent most of his time gleaning information and modern farming ideas from the university library so he could save the farm. This intensive search for answers forced the librarian to restrict his mess to his own little office cubicle on the 6th floor, usually reserved for graduate students. By the time he graduated from college, he had 5 plastic totes filled with files of photocopied research and ideas for improving his family's farm. He couldn't wait to give this business plan to his dad and was blown away when his dad looked at the cover, then threw it into the firebox. From that moment forward, father and son turned from best friends into worst enemies. Any idea Bobby had for improving the farm was quickly dismissed. It soon became obvious that his dad was against considering any new ideas to improve the farm unless it was his own idea. Desperate for change, Bobby and his mother begged his uncle to intervene. Finally, Uncle Claude stepped in and suggested to his younger brother, "Why don't you give the boy the field behind the barn? He can try his ideas out there where he can't hurt anything." That made sense to Bobby's dad. "If they work, great," Claude continued. "You can expand it out to the rest of the farm in the future. If they don't work, then it's only a few acres sacrificed, and it's not a huge loss." Bobby's dad reluctantly agreed. By August, Uncle Claude had terminal cancer and could barely walk through Bobby's field with him, but it was obvious that he was impressed with his nephew. Claude asked Bobby some hard questions about his crazy business model and was met with some credible answers. Claude joked over dinner that his nephew was going to make more money from a few acres than his brother was with the entire farm that year. Claude was joking, of course, but his brother did not laugh along. Bobby came back to the farm a few days later to see that his dad had gone out to his field and plowed it under. There was no excuse for this behavior, and it was the straw that broke the camel's back between him and his dad. There was nothing but arguing thereafter. In the dark days after Uncle Claude passed, there was talk between Bobby's parents that they had to get a succession plan in place. The succession planner that was called out to the farm was there no more than 20 minutes when Bobby's dad walked out of the meeting, slamming the front door. He was angry, and so was Bobby's mom. She jumped out of her chair and yelled out across the yard as her husband was just getting into the old Chevy. "Don't you dare buy any more farming equipment until you have made a business plan with your son." She was tired of the farm losing money and wanted to put a stop to it being a money pit. Did he listen to her? Well, he went off to an auction sale and won the bid for a manure spreader. He came home with that manure spreader, and I guess you could say the fit hit the shan that day. 3 days later, Bobby's mom left the separation papers on the ping pong table in their garage. Bobby went and worked a myriad of odd jobs ranging from feeding goats to cowboying on a 3 million-acre station in Australia. After it was clear that his dad didn't want anything to do with him, he founded an agriculture environmental software company by pretending to be a student to use University of Guelph Library as his office, and sleeping that winter in his car in 2 sleeping bags to keep warm. Without owning a computer, he managed to convince investors to provide $250,000 in venture capital, and only 4 years later, he had 68% control of a company that employed 15 people and was worth $4 million. Everyone thought ISO Farming Inc. was the next big thing. In 2004, cattle prices were at an all-time low in Canada due to mad cow disease, and Bobby's dad was about to lose everything with his divorce. He knew Bobby had sold 1% of his company's stock and bought a new executive class car. His dad gave him an ultimatum. "If you don't come home to take over the farm right now, I'm going to be forced to sell everything." When Bobby got the call, he walked out of the office, leaving his company to implode. He could have led ISO Farm Inc. for a few more years and sold it, being able to afford many farms. But all he wanted to do was take over the home farm that his ancestors cleared back in 1832. 3 months after coming home to farm with his dad, the topic of money came up. Bobby's dad was disgusted when he realized that Bobby's shares were now worth nothing because he simply walked out of the office to react to his ultimatum. It was clear his dad did not want him. He wanted his money. Bobby was abandoned on the side of the road, penniless. Bobby's life was on hold. He dated a lot of nice girls and wanted a large family, but he chose never to get into a serious relationship until he got things sorted out with his parents. He simply couldn't fathom raising kids if he wasn't on the home farm. During this time in limbo, Bobby's dad was holding onto a stick with a carrot. Bobby would get a significant opportunity off the farm, but then a desperate call from his dad would make him drop everything and come home to Bob Caygeon. When his dad decided he didn't need him, he left his son hanging, and this went on for far too long. One consulting job Bobby did was to put together a 10-year strategic plan for Pfizer Animal Health for the Western Canadian feedlot industry. In another stint, he helped a group of John Deere dealerships in southern Alberta develop a strategic plan for how they were going to market and support new GPS technology when it was just being unboxed in 2005. Yet his dad refused to listen to any of his ideas to improve farm profitability. Working for these companies gave him no purpose, though. For Bobby, life without farming in Bob Caygeon was meaningless. Bobby gave his parents an ultimatum. He threatened to hang himself on his next birthday if his parents didn't get a business and a succession plan for the farm's future sorted out. Both parents were very narcissistic and didn't take him seriously. They cared more about their reputation in the rural community and what everyone in Bob Caygeon thought about them than their son's feelings or his well-being. They stopped returning his calls. They were getting divorced, and they had emotionally divorced him as well in the process. Bobby grew up thinking that his ancestors, who worked tirelessly, had given him the right to farm. Bobby found out the hard way that nobody has the right to farm. It's a rare privilege. While 70% of family farms have a successor interested in farming, only 12% pass over the farm to their grandkids. Bobby learned this statistic in college, but he thought his own family becoming this statistic could never, ever happen. He felt farming was his birthright. Growing up, he felt that if none of his cousins were going to carry on the family tradition, he was obligated to do so. The year that he took the risk to go to college and get an agriculture business degree, 18 herds of cattle were dispersed in the township, and everyone said, "There is no future in farming." Bobby was a Calvinist who believed his predestination was to be a steward of that farm in the surrounding county, continuing a 7-generation family tradition. Now that he had made the sacrifices to go to college when everyone had told him not to and had studied so hard to figure out a way to solve the farm's business issues, he felt entitled to the opportunity. Yet after Uncle Claude's death, nobody cared to talk sense into his dad, and he felt betrayed that no one seemed to care about the sacrifices he had made to continue the family legacy. He didn't want to kill himself, but his parents had divorced, and the farm had no future. He felt cheated of his destiny. On his birthday, he found himself sitting on a barn beam with a rope around his neck and a rifle in his lap. It was the same .22 rifle he had used as a kid that was sitting just inside the barn door, loaded as always. He had bought a rope in a hardware store a week before, but at the last minute decided to use an old lariat that was hanging on the wall. Some of his favorite childhood memories were the hours he spent practicing roping and using the same rope on that thrashed floor. The rope was covered in manure, but it would still hold weight. The heft of the rope as it flew off the tip of his fingers as he threw it over the barn beam was like suddenly feeling the entire weight of the full moon in the sky. Many thoughts flooded Bobby's head as he sat on that barn beam. The barn was eerily silent except for the rain on the steel roof and raccoons rummaging in the granary. After a frustrating decade of trying to save the farm and his parents' marriage, he felt he was out of options. He had just officiated a friend's wedding in Guelph earlier that afternoon and hadn't touched any alcohol. He had driven 3 hours across Toronto through traffic to get back home. He had scheduled the day and the hour of his demise for nearly a year. He was absolutely certain at that moment that he was of sound mind and judgment. For the months leading up to it, he had gone to a psychiatrist to make sure of that, and the doctor said in an East Indian accent, "You've made poor choices in trying to please your parents, but there's nothing wrong with the chemistry in your brain." Beyond his parents, he had told nobody about his threats. He had given what little he had in a church collection plate that night, even though he wasn't Catholic. He didn't know how many hours he sat on that beam, but he was in complete shock that things had gotten so bad that he was in this spot. He didn't want to jump, but he was stubborn and now felt obligated to follow through on his threat. His identity was farming in Caygeon, and without it, who was he? His parents' divorce that year was crushing for him. But a smirk also spread across his face as he realized it was also a great lead-in joke. Word got out that his parents divorced over a fight about a manure spreader. Who couldn't see that humor in that? Bobby became the guy that his friends could come and have a beer with at the end of a long, dysfunctional day farming with their families. People could freely open up to Bobby and spill the emotional roller coasters they were on because they knew Bobby had already been there himself. These stories flooded Bobby's thoughts as he sat there on that barn beam. He suddenly, for the first time, realized he wasn't the only farmer who was struggling with coming home to work with their stubborn dad. Stubborn was a word that just kept on going over and over in his head. He initially thought it was because he was determined to follow through on his threat to his parents. But eventually he walked away from that barn, realizing his new life mission to help stubborn farmers work better together. He didn't understand what this entailed at the time, but he knew it meant there were some radical changes that needed to happen. Bobby's full name is Mark Andrew Junkin of Caygeon, but since college, everyone except telemarketers has called him Caygeon or Caygeon, because there has never been a kid so proud of where he was from.
But this isn't just any story. I'm Bobby. This is my story.
And this is Bernadette, who just told my husband's story. It's quite the story, I know, but one I hope you can see how genuinely he understands and emphasizes with you. He truly sees this as his life's mission, besides being the best husband and dad, of course. And I think this is what you will come to find as you listen to this book.
My grandpa had a saying, never complain and never explain. Everyone goes through hard times, and I'm not telling you this story to play the victim or to get a pity party. I never told a soul, not even my wife, about this pivotal moment until we lost another farm boy who was my friend's brother to suicide 2 summers ago, and I came out of the closet about my experience. Farmers have a higher suicide rate than war veterans returning from Afghanistan, and this statistic has got to stop right now. Mental health is like picking ripe peaches, choosing your thoughts carefully. However, emotional health is how you handle the ones that turn out to be sour. A lot of times we blame farm suicides on mental health, but don't realize that many farmers are struggling with emotional health and don't know how to handle those sour peaches. I truly believe the real root problems that cause many of the emotional health issues in farming are not being addressed. I know what it is like to be frustrated working with family in a family business and the ripple effects it can have on every aspect of your life. Every person considering suicide has different reasons. However, many big farm problems ranging from bankruptcy to divorce to farm succession are often a side effect of a root issue. That root issue is the inability to, and frustration that comes from, not being able to make good decisions together with your family in a family business. This struggle doesn't just affect farmers. It is a problem that a lot of folks from all types of family businesses encounter. Maybe that is you or someone you love. I've never been back to Bob Caygeon since that fateful day, and likely won't until the day my boys spread my ashes. But I have officially taken Caygeon as my middle name because I've become a different man since that day. I have dedicated my life to trying to figure out a different way to fix the root issues to this seemingly impossible problem of how to work with stubborn family members. I've dedicated the last 16 years to figuring out how to turn stubborn from a bad word into a good thing for family farms. I have a few simple, common sense, yet counterintuitive concepts to share with you that any family business can apply. What I'm about to tell you is the solution to stubbornness that I've discovered during the 16 years since I walked away from my family's barn in Bob Caygeon.
Introduction: The conundrum we don't recognize.
Farming has changed a lot in the last 100 years. We have had a lot of changes in technology ranging from the invention of the tractor to genetics to the use of modern herbicides. We even have robots milking cows and driving tractors autonomously nowadays. But the biggest change that few have recognized is the impact modern health sciences have had on farming. Back in the 1960s, when Dad was 60, he'd retire when his back was sore or his hips were shot. Nowadays, when Dad is in his 60s and he has bad hips, he goes in for hip surgery and can carry on farming into his 80s. I think I may have met only a handful of farmers who preferred to retire than die with their boots on. For most farmers, working is a key part of their identity. However, instead of one generation running the business at a time, we now have 3 generations co-managing the family company together. Awkwardly. Stubbornly. Suddenly, we have too many quarterbacks and no offensive line. Multiple generations, multiple siblings, and multiple cousins working together is a dream for many. But that dream often turns into a nightmare of frustrations, bickering, and lost profit. Even if you do get along as a family, any point of friction can hold you back and not allow you to go forward. On most farms, miscommunication and egos are impacting the farm's bottom line more than the markets and weather combined. 100 years ago, the husband was dominant in marriage and the wife was subservient. The man was king of his castle and often would rule it with an iron fist. Then women got the vote and decision dynamics changed at home, or at least theoretically. The reason we evolved from our chauvinistic, old-fashioned ways is that nobody wants to be subservient or treated as a slave. For the last 100 years, most marriages have struggled with this power struggle between genders. It often would result in verbal, emotional, and mental abuse. At some point in time, the stress of the power struggle gets beyond the scope of what is bearable. This power struggle is leading to a skyrocketing divorce rate with nearly half of marriages ending in failure, and God only knows how many married couples are in truly happy, healthy relationships. The same issues are happening with family businesses as well. We have power struggles between partners as to who is the boss and who is subservient. This is becoming more of an issue as you suddenly have multiple generations and siblings working together. Nobody wants to be the other guy's slave for 20 or more years. This power struggle leads to a dysfunctional team that can't make decisions together, stubbornly pushes selfish individual agendas, and talks over the top of each other. We get into confrontations where we get verbally, emotionally, and even sometimes physically involved. The root is that we get stubborn with each other. Now, don't get me wrong, being stubborn can be a good thing for a business partnership or marriage because it means sticking together through tough times, staying true to important values, and persistently working toward shared goals, even when faced with challenges. However, there are many, many ways that being stubborn can be toxic to a business partnership or marriage. However, after working with family farms in 22 states and 5 Canadian provinces, I've observed the following 4 things are evidence of toxic stubbornness in family businesses. Do you see any of these in your family business? You focus on winning arguments instead of ultimately making the right decision. Family interactions frequently cause headaches and frustration. You're obsessed about your own needs. Family members no longer care about the needs or feelings of each other. You point your finger at others, not looking at the 3 fingers in your hand pointing back at you. Family members don't take responsibility for their own faults and shortcomings. You get obsessed with short-term wins. The family has lost the long-term perspective of what matters most. In this book, we are going to talk about these 4 bad traits of stubbornness and flip them on their head so that being stubborn is a good quality that can become your business's competitive advantage. In the first 3 chapters, we will talk about how to fix family headbutting contests, narcissism, and finger pointing. In the 5th chapter, we will talk about business succession in a way you've probably never thought about, yet makes common sense. In Chapter 4 and in the afterword, we offer practical ways that you can apply these concepts into the reality of your life. When you think about it, it is when your family is stubborn with each other in a bad way that it impacts both your business's efficiency and your personal frustrations. Even if you get along great with your family, anything you can do to improve how you work together as a team is going to skyrocket business profitability and make working with family more fun. That's what this book is about. If your team buys into these concepts, you will evolve your family business and relationships to the next level. You've got to stop being stubborn with each other and start being stubborn at the habits that make a business and a family successful.
Now, let's do a little housekeeping.
Before we get any further into this book, there are 3 things you need to know. First, I come from a stubborn farm family myself. For our situation, we chose to be the wrong type of stubborn. In sharing my story earlier, I'm not throwing stones at my parents, because believe me, I was narcissistic, entitled, and stubborn as well. I was equally at fault, if not more so. I love my parents, and although they made mistakes, I empathize that they weren't self-aware and didn't know a different way of doing things. I hope that everyone understands that I'm brutally honest about our experience, not to dishonor my parents, but to help other families avoid similar complications, and as a result, in my own way, honor them. Second, as a farm kid, I was big into a rural youth leadership program called 4-H. I believe in this organization so much. It's where I donate my tithings. I often joke that what I do consulting with farm families is like 4-H for adults. I think that will make more sense as you dive deeper into this book. So that you can remember what we talked about in 2 weeks, we are going to use word associations with each of the 4 major chapters and topics discussed in this book. We will relate them to each H in the 4-H pledge: head, heart, hands, and health. I don't know about you, but I need a sticky way to remember what I learned so that I can apply it. And third, I'm a farm boy who has learned these methods by helping family farms in 22 states and 5 Canadian provinces. Thus, throughout this book, you will find only farming examples to help teach the characteristics of the right kind of stubbornness. However, if you are a farmer or not, many folks from family businesses and other industries have applied these counterintuitive yet common sense ideas to their family business as well and have had success. I'll let you figure out for yourself if these concepts are applicable to you. And we should not forget, Jesus used farming examples when he was speaking, and folks easily figured out how to apply his concepts to their lives. If using farming examples worked for Jesus, then I figure it should work for me too.
Chapter 1. Head. Stop butting heads with each other.
Katie was frustrated. She had put a lot of research into calf barn ventilation and had gotten 3 quotes from 3 different suppliers. The farm had double the number of calves getting sick due to poor ventilation in its calf barns. Throughout the year, she had worked with the vet to tweak everything she could in the barn to reduce the number of calves getting pneumonia, but without fixing the root problem, which was the poor ventilation system, they'd continue to have problems next year. She did the math, and the $30,000 investment into a new ventilation system would pay for itself within 2 years by reducing the calf sickness rate by half. By fewer calves getting sick, it would not only be more humane, but more profitable. Being an agriculture college graduate, she had put in the time to write a 1-page report and have a financial analysis to prove her assumptions, and backed it up with 3 different quotes from different suppliers. She gave this report to her dad in the milk house after they were just finishing up chores and going for breakfast. At that moment, her brother showed up to the barn a half hour late for chores, yet again, and it was obvious that her dad was pissed at her brother, but he didn't say anything. Her dad took the report, folded it up, and stuck it in his back pocket, focusing on going back to what he was doing. A couple of days later, she asked her dad what he thought of her suggestions, and he said, "We have no money for that. Maybe next year." It was December, and Katie knew that the farm had an exceptional year with high milk prices. Plus, milk production was 10% higher since she had taken over herd management 2 years prior. She knew that the farm was going to have profits at the end of the year and would likely reinvest money somewhere before the year's end to avoid paying more taxes. Later that morning, a brand new $600,000 combine showed up in the yard. Katie was astounded. She knew nothing about that purchase. She complained to her dad, but all he said was, "Well, I'm trying to get your brother to give a damn about this farm." And he said that he wanted a new combine, so we got him one. At that moment, her brother's truck drove up to the yard, this time an hour late, to do farm chores. Of course, he was ecstatic to see the new purchase. All the men in the family were really, her dad, her Uncle Bob, and her brother were like kids on Christmas morning getting a new toy. The farm already had a combine with less than 1,000 hours on it, and the farm could have easily gone another 5 years before replacing the one they had. She was irate that decisions were being made were based on emotion and people-pleasing rather than cash flow. She called me up and complained. She told me that if she were a boy, her concerns would have actually been heard. She was frustrated because any time her brother said he wanted something, he got it. What he wanted seemed to matter more, just because he was a male. I didn't disagree with Katie. It was probably true. I said to her, "From what you told me about your dad, it sounds like he doesn't even realize he's being chauvinistic. 5,000 years of paradigms are hard to change within a generation, and you're going to be facing this challenge in working with him all your life. But this is only a fraction of your problem. The first problem is your biggest one. Your dad thinks of the farm as his, not ours. You have put in as many hours into the business over the past year as he has, but he still looks at you as his helper or employee, not a partner. Decisions are being made without you being involved because you are merely a helper. You've increased milk production significantly and done chores twice a day, every day this past year, without taking a single holiday except one weekend for your cousin's wedding. You have been making personal sacrifices to make this business successful to the point that the farm will have extra profit at the end of the year. Yet your opinion doesn't matter. A my farm to our farm mindset shift needs to happen. The second thing is that your dad doesn't look at business decisions as rational investments, but instead as giving gifts to his kids. Too many decisions are emotionally based. He was trying to motivate your brother by giving him a fancy toy to get him more interested in the farm, rather than an objective investment in what would make the farm more money. Putting in new calf barn ventilation does nothing to build his ego. However, driving a new combine is a status symbol that impresses the neighbors and makes him feel good about himself. Your challenge is to eliminate the egos and emotions from decision-making on your farm and instead make decisions based on what is good for the farm and family in the long term, not making excuses to just do what feels good today. The third thing is that your dad, Tom, built that calf barn. He was really proud of that barn when he first built it, and for you to say that it isn't good enough is probably an insult to him. I am certain that back when he built that calf barn, he did the best he could with the technology and budget the farm had at the time. But over the last 23 years, ventilation systems have evolved and there are other options. You must help him look at your suggestion as an improvement to the efficiency of the farm, not an insult to what he's done in the past. Whether he consciously recognizes this or not, he might resent you criticizing his design decisions from when he built that barn 23 years ago. Katie listened quietly as I explained her challenges. I repeated myself. Your number one challenge is getting all the partners to see the farm as our farm instead of Dad's farm. This would eliminate so much of the BS you're experiencing, including your brother's immature actions. The reason why your brother is showing up late to work and acting like an employee is that he is thinking of himself as an employee, not an owner. Truthfully, he has a slave's mindset, not an owner's mindset, and that is a huge problem. If you want your brother to pull his weight and act like a partner, he's got to start thinking like a partner and being treated like one. But how do I do that? Katie sounded exasperated. For crying out loud, the farm is called Tom Van Boer's Farm. I brought up changing the farm's name to Van Boer Family Farm last month, and Dad blew up at me. I quickly told Katie a story to illustrate. When I was a young man, I was a Boy Scout. My Boy Scout leader took a bunch of us out to the woods and told us to go light a fire. Me and an 8-year-old friend dragged a big old log out of the swamp and tried to light it on fire. My Boy Scout leader watched us for about 15 minutes and laughed, while the other much older boys were successful in lighting their fires. Then after we were frustrated, he stepped in and showed us the proper way to build a fire. He said, "Boys, you need to start with the small, dry kindling first, and then add bigger and bigger sticks to the fire as the fire can handle it." So it is with family decision-making. Fighting over succession planning, the company's name, wanting to spend $1 million for a business expansion, or even just $30,000 like in your case, is as foolish as trying to start a big wet log from the swamp. You need to get your farm's multiple generations and multiple siblings making decisions together on small issues prior to making the big ones. You need to learn to listen to each other and be able to problem solve and arrive at simple decisions together without emotion before you solve the complex ones. But where do I start? Katie said. How in the heck can you get everyone agreeing with each other, let alone listening to a girl? As a mediator, I used to sit families down for a family business meeting to discuss strategic matters, and it would be like trying to get a big old wet log lit. Now I focus on the question, what is your family doing tomorrow with their time? I told Katie, I'd suggest that you get your family to adapt the mantra, invest time like it's money, and learn to make decisions together as a team as to how to best invest your time. These decisions are simple with usually no emotions attached. Katie's ears perked up, and I could hear her voice change to a more optimistic tone. Farm families often bicker about where and how to invest their financial resources, what tractor or seed to buy. But the most valuable resource for every business is the use of the owner's time. If I can get you, Tom, Uncle Bob, and your brother to have a conversation on Monday morning about how many hours each of you plan to invest in the business in the forthcoming week and budget your hours just the same as you would for finances, it's a game changer. Katie played the devil's advocate. I don't think my dad would really be up to any type of meeting. He sees them as a waste of time. Does he watch football? She laughed. Of course, he's from Wisconsin. Well, in football, every team has a brief huddle before making a play. This doesn't mean that every play goes as planned. In a similar way, the best laid plans for your farm are never going to go as you draw them out. There are going to be days when you have breakdowns, bad weather, or other complications. But statistically, you score more touchdowns if you go into each play with a plan that everyone can work from instead of everyone doing their own thing. Katie agreed. I can only imagine if the Packers didn't ever huddle. Exactly, I said. The crowd would burn down the stadium in rage. The players all know how to play football, but if they don't know what their partners are thinking and planning to do, then winning would be nearly impossible. It's the same thing with coming up with a plan on Monday morning. It doesn't mean everything is going to go according to plan, but what it does mean is that at least you'll have a plan of attack and accomplish more together as a team, instead of everyone running every which way and fumbling the ball. Although Katie's dad, uncle, and brother were initially reluctant, they agreed to do a weekly meeting for a 12-week trial to see if it made a difference, and it did, to the point that they are still doing these meetings today.
Treat time like it's money.
Like I said to Katie, farmers need to budget their time the same as they budget their finances. You need to look at the use of your time and your employees' time the same as any cash investment. Every fiscal quarter, you probably sit down with a financial spreadsheet and ask yourself, how are we planning to invest our cash over the next 90 days to make the best use of our money? If you don't sit down to do a budget, then you'll spend your money frivolously doing whatever feels good in the moment. In the same way, you need to look at the investment of your time and that of your staff's time. You need to see how you are all about to spend the next week as an investment. Ask yourself, are we spending the right amount of time on the right things? Or are we not spending enough time doing critical things and instead getting caught up in the crisis of the day, which in 6 months won't matter? Instead of fighting fires, intentionally invest your time, prevent fires from ever happening. Just like it's critical to invest your financial resources, it is critical to invest your time resources to get the results you want. If you think money is finite, time is even more finite, and there are only so many things you can get done in a week. Are you placing your effort each week to do the right things, or just burning yourself out, running from one thing to the next? Just the same as you guard your wallet from a thief, you must protect the use of your time with equal, if not more, precaution. The key thing here is that you just don't look at your investment of time into the business, but also each of your partners' own investment of their time. In a family business, what you are doing is pooling your resources of time and money. You and your partners are collectively investing both your time and capital into growing the business. When your partner wastes an afternoon doing a task that isn't important, that is the same as him or her stealing money from the farm's bank account. Too often we are spending these resources not investing them because we aren't being wise or intentional about how we use our time. Thus, we get frustrated when we see money or time being wasted. You must look at time budgeting like you look at investing a limited amount of money on a pro forma spreadsheet. Time only goes so far. You can't just apply it aimlessly to your to-do list of never-ending tasks. Failing to plan how you invest your family's collective time or money is planning to fail. What I did for this family, which is what I do for most families I start working with, is help everyone to begin the routine of a family breakfast meeting on Monday mornings to plan out the week. Katie, her dad, her uncle, and her brother came to the table with a to-do list, not just for themselves, but the whole team. They went through the tasks together and numerically ranked the priorities of the task, as well as how long they'd take. Then, based on the weather forecast, they figured out what jobs were getting done on what days and by whom. For each day, they specified the priority task to get done, and then what other tasks could get done if there was extra time. Each night after chores, the family would have a huddle to confirm the plan for the next day. Sometimes plans had to be tweaked from what was agreed upon during the Monday meeting, but it was in this end-of-day huddle that each partner walked away with a solid to-do list for the next day and a commitment from each partner to getting it done by sunset the next night. It caused 3 paradigm shifts. First, they learned to respectfully disagree intentionally and prioritize together. Instead of having a never-ending list of tasks that needed to get done, they started to look at that list of tasks, asking what are the 20% of things on this list that we need to focus 80% of our efforts on doing and doing right. Instead of always being a day late and dollar short, they started to do less busy work and got critical tasks done in a timelier manner. Both Katie and her brother started thinking like owners instead of slaves, and Katie's brother really started to understand the value of his time. Instead of him showing up whenever and going home whenever he felt like it, he'd commit to how many hours he was planning to work that week, and then get specific with how many hours he was planning to work each day. And amazingly, he started to show up to work on time and stayed close to keeping those hours because he felt obligated to follow through on his word. Instead of doing the minimum, he focused on getting the most out of each day, and for the first time, Katie was excited to be in a partnership with her brother. The mindset of the business shifted from everyone thinking in terms of their little fiefdoms and their personal priorities to thinking like a team. By them coming to the table with a list of tasks in prioritized order for the whole team, it changed everything. They no longer thought in terms of, what do I have to do this week? Their farm's thought process became, what do we have to do this week for this business to succeed? They started to help each other out to get done what the big picture goals were for the business and the family that week. They were less concerned with their individual needs. For example, when their uncle's kid had a piano recital, Katie's brother offered to do his chores on Tuesday night so he could get away. They really started to think like a team. Katie's dad's mindset shifted from his kids working for him and being replaceable to them being business partners and invaluable.
Living intentionally.
Last week, I went to a busy restaurant and saw 2 families who each had 2 teenage kids sitting side by side in a booth. One family all had their phones out and had their eyes glued to their phones with very little social interaction among them. The other family all pulled out their cell phones and stacked them in the middle of the table. It was obvious they had a family rule that nobody touches their phone during a meal together, and they were being intentional with their time together. This family was talking and laughing with each other throughout the meal. Which family do you think got the full $100 value out of the experience of going out for a meal? Which family will likely still get together for Christmas in 10 years' time? Which family invested their time like it was money? With Katie's brother, I got him to write down the value of each hour each day, both in terms of the time he spent on the farm and with his wife and 2 kids. When he put his mind to it, Katie's brother was a skilled mechanic whose time would be billed out at 100 per hour if he worked for John Deere. There were some days where he was easily worth that, and other days during the winter months when he'd drag out finishing a job that a paid mechanic would do over just a few hours. Katie's brother always complained that he was stuck working weekends and was a slave to the business. My statement to him was, instead of your time being worth little more on a Tuesday afternoon than $10 an hour, make it worth $100 all the time by making each hour count. If you make each hour on the farm count during a weekday, then, when the snow is flying, your dad and uncle will have no problems with you taking Saturdays off. He accomplished this by starting to measure the value of what he accomplished each hour. Was he worth $10 or $100 an hour at 2 p.m. on Tuesday? At the time, he was having difficulty in his marriage, and I started to get him to measure the value of his time not only at work but at home. He and his wife canceled their Netflix subscription and have really worked hard to make each hour at home worth $100 an hour as well. By being purposeful in how he invested his time like money, both at work and home, his life has turned around. Prior to Monday morning meetings, each partner has to discuss with their spouse on the Sunday night before about the demands of the family. On Monday mornings, the partners discuss how they can support one another to be able to balance family obligations with work obligations. With Katie's family, the entire group must look at each partner's time, not only as an investment in the business, but also into each of their families. Everyone has to realize that for the business's long-term health, divorce is only going to be prevented by each partner investing their time not only into the business, but also into their families in a productive way. They hold each other accountable to being conscious of how they invest their time in the business and in their personal lives. Arnold Schwarzenegger said it best in a speech on YouTube called 6 Rules to Success. He said, "You've got to sleep 6 hours a day, and if you've got to sleep more than 6 hours, I suggest you figure out a way to sleep faster. That leaves you 18 hours in a day. You show me how you invest those 18 hours, I'll show you where you'll be in 18 years." If your family gets better at being more purposeful in the principle of investing your time like it's money as a team, you'll be able to not only have a successful business, but a happy family life as well.
To disagree or not to disagree?
You may wonder how disagreements can be any good at all, but when you learn how to have constructive disagreements in the right way, it can be a good thing. Learning how to have constructive disagreements or crucial conversations in a family business is super important. It helps family members work together better because they can discuss problems without fighting. This skill also helps them make good business decisions and keeps their relationships from getting messed up. So it's like a secret sauce for a successful family business that stays strong and happy. However, it is a skill set that doesn't come naturally. For over 20 years, a parent has had an "I'm smarter than you" attitude as they raise their children. Then they must transition from a parent-child relationship to a professional working relationship that allows for respectful differing of opinions between parent and adult child. This is about as unnatural of a transition process as you can think of. As one son said, "How can I speak up in a family meeting at the same kitchen table where, if I had a different worldview and spoke out of turn 20 years before, I would have gotten a wooden spoon smacked along the side of my head?" Over the last 15 years, I have come to learn that the key about learning the skill of having crucial conversations amongst family members is to have thoughtful discussions about small, unemotional things first. And that is just what treating time like it's money does. I'm not saying that at the start, these crucial conversations won't be tense, but over time, families learn to constructively disagree with each other in a respectful manner and to better problem solve together. One time, Katie's uncle laid out his plan for the week, and part of that was cutting the lawn on Tuesday afternoon. The uncle was in charge of the farm's bookkeeping, and he was habitually late in paying the bills to suppliers, which not only was embarrassing for Katie, but often cost the farm extra money in late fees. Katie respectfully mentioned that Thursday was the last day of the month. Perhaps Martin or Jose could cut the lawn instead, and you can pay the bills on Tuesday. If looks could kill, she would have been assassinated in that moment, but at the same time the uncle knew she was right, even though he would rather have a tooth pulled than pay bills. The uncle made a funny face as he put the task of pay the bills on the top of his list for Tuesday. Over time, what happened in these meetings were 3 subtle but substantial things. First, instead of doing whatever felt good, the family members started tackling the priority projects and doing what was right for the farm. Nobody was above the law. Next, it became okay to challenge the older generation's way of thinking. In fact, it was encouraged. You stop having to be perfect all the time in front of family members and your insecurities will dissipate. You get past that teenage-like confrontational mindset. What became important was that the right decisions were being made, not who was right. Finally, Dad and Uncle learned to respect Katie and her brother's opinion, if it made sense. When it didn't, both kids learned a valuable lesson as to why things are done the way they are. Dad began to view his kids as mature adults and as partners whose opinions he respected. Their relationships went from parent-child relationships where father knew best to a professional working partnership.
What comes after Monday morning meetings?
After 6 weeks of weekly Monday morning meetings, we started to also have a monthly family business meeting with Katie and her family where the partners brainstorm ways to improve the business. My rule of thumb is that the suggested changes during the first 6 months of using this process can't be more than 0.1% of what the farm's assets are worth. For this farm business, the farm's balance sheet said that it was worth just over $5 million, and thus we had a rule of thumb that no one could suggest an improvement that could cost more than $5,000. I didn't want the discussion to focus on spending $2 million building a new barn, which was a dream Katie had. I knew it had to start with a few low-cost changes first, while utilizing the buildings and machinery they already owned. My goal for these meetings was to focus on simple management changes that would quickly improve the efficiency of the day-to-day operations without laying out a lot of capital. As I explained to Katie in one of our first discussions, start with the small kindling, then add larger and larger logs as the fire can handle it.
From a parent-child to a professional working relationship.
During one of these monthly brainstorming meetings, Katie's brother suggested a very simple idea about improving farm efficiency that impacted both time wasted and money spent. He suggested that every day after work, and before partners go home, that they had to put any tools that were used that day in their proper place. He backed his idea by explaining how the farm had spent nearly $4,300 on various tools last year that were, for the most part, tools they had already owned but had misplaced. Someone had left that tool lying around, couldn't find it, and then decided to buy another because that was easier than looking for it. Katie's brother had OCD and was meticulous about putting away tools. However, his dad and uncle were perpetually bad at leaving tools around, and over the past few years there had been some arguments because of this. Katie's dad called me after that meeting feeling hurt and disrespected. He felt he was singled out in that situation, and his son had no appreciation for the hard work that had gone into building that farm. I knew exactly where Katie's dad was coming from, but I also knew that I had to help him see past his ego and understand what's best for the farm and partnership as a whole. I asked him the question, wouldn't it be better for you to make a few improvements to how you boys work together, rather than for your son to get frustrated working with you and get so angry one day that he wants to quit or even buy you out? It's not just him that has to make some changes, it is you as well. There was silence on the other end. I wasn't sure if I lost him or not. I continued cautiously and said, you know as well as I do that if everyone put tools away after they were done with them, the farm will be better off. Little pet peeves like you constantly leaving tools laying around will add up over the years to the point that your son gets sick and tired of working with you. Same as the pet peeve you had with your son a couple months back with constantly showing up to the barn late. I wouldn't have blamed you for firing him for that if he didn't put the work in to change his bad habit. But he did change, Tom said. I knew Tom was beginning to see more clearly. He did, I agreed. It might be hard to be called out by your son, even indirectly, but you guys must get rid of this father-knows-best mindset and transition from a parent-child to a professional working relationship. It's not just your son that has to act like a professional. Everyone involved in the business does, and that includes you and your brother. But let me assure you, these moments will eventually not come across as disrespectful anymore, because they are not about an individual but about improving the farm and partnership. But this can only happen if everyone is respectful and listening to everyone's perspective.
Transitioning management wisdom.
In another meeting, Katie brought an idea to the table about where they bought their crop inputs. Instead of using the local co-op, she found an online service where the farm could buy several different types of fertilizers and seed inputs that were 5 to 15% cheaper. Her uncle congratulated her for looking into it, but he also posed her a question. He asked her if when they had another agronomic problem in the field, would the company she suggested send someone out to help them figure out the problem and how to fix it? Katie was sure they did, but was unsure as to what to expect in response time for a service call. Well, they might send someone out, Uncle Bob continued, but it might be 6 weeks after you call them and not 6 hours. If we're in a tight spot, every day counts. Katie did not like having her ideas shot down. Katie, you are welcome to dig some more, but keep in mind that having good relationships with key people can either make or break you. Her uncle left it at that, and Katie understood. In that moment, Katie learned the importance of building long-term relationships with suppliers and how it was a value that had helped the farm succeed over the past 30 years. She learned a piece of valuable management wisdom, something that I believe is more important to transfer to the next generation before ever talking about asset transfer. One of my biggest pet peeves when working alongside some succession professionals is their obsession about the transfer of assets, instead of first focusing on the transition of management skills. They look at succession as a day-long event, not a decade-long process. With one of my first clients, I remember speaking to a very arrogant accountant who thought the simple solution to helping a 22-year-old son and his 57-year-old father to better work together was for the son to go to the bank and buy his father out. The accountant was obsessed with making things work on paper so that the bank would lend this broke 22-year-old $10 million. There was no discussion about whether the son had the management skills to be able to repay the loans. Where I'm from in Caygeon, the son who gets the farm inherits the family Bible and the family's fiddle. It takes at least 10,000 hours of me sitting beside my boy to teach him how to play the violin to the level that he could play in front of a crowd. It's one thing for my 5-year-old to see me play the fiddle, but it's a different thing for him to be able to pick up the violin and make sweet music out of it himself. Just in the same way it takes at least 10,000 hours for a son or daughter to be involved in joint decision-making and questioning why things are done the way they are done. They need 10,000 hours first-hand experience in decision-making, not just as a bystander, for them to have the confidence to manage under pressure. There are a lot of farming parents who think that their kids are learning how to make management decisions by observing how it's done. That's just like learning how to drive from watching in the back seat. This might sound like enough driving practice in theory, but it's just as effective as me thinking my kid is going to learn to play the fiddle by watching me play the fiddle, without ever picking it up himself. Professional sports teams emphasize the significance of nurturing self-confidence in players for success in intense games. Self-confidence plays a pivotal role in helping athletes perform under pressure, develop resilience, maintain mental toughness, take calculated risks, foster a positive mindset, and contribute to cohesive team dynamics. Similarly, parents grooming their children for management roles over several years must consider self-confidence equally crucial, as it allows next-generation owners to gradually develop decision-making skills, a sense of responsibility and accountability, the ability to learn from experiences, strong communication skills, and teamwork abilities. Nurturing self-confidence is preparing them effectively for future leadership positions. We have no idea when the Lord is going to take us from this world. I've seen a lot of 40-something-year-old farmers suddenly making real decisions for the first time 2 weeks after a funeral. They buckle under pressure when the first high-stakes decision comes up. To me, it makes sense to involve your successor in joint decision-making shortly after they graduate from college and return to the farm, rather than after a parent gets diagnosed with terminal cancer. Unlike milk cartons, we don't come with expiration dates, and I believe that the sooner you can start grooming your successor to have excellence in critical decision-making skills, the better. This is so that if a parent's lifespan is shorter than expected, your life legacy still lasts forever. Why? Because if your successor is involved in decision-making for the decade prior to Dad's passing, and not just a bystander, you can be more confident that decisions will be made a decade after Dad's funeral with the same wisdom and confidence that Dad or Grandpa exhibited.
Accountability.
It's not only important to learn to make decisions together as family members, but to follow up on these decisions as a team in subsequent meetings and hold partners accountable to following through on what they said they'd do. Business partners sometimes come up with reasons or excuses for not completing tasks, which can sound like, "I couldn't do it because of this or that." When these excuses pile up, it can slow down or even stop important decisions from happening in a business. This can be a problem because decisions often lead to actions that make the company money. So, when things don't get done, the business can lose out on opportunities to make more profit. It's like having a car but not putting gas in it. It won't go anywhere without fuel. A business won't grow without decisions turning into actions. Here's what I've learned about accountability in family businesses. First, accountability ensures that good ideas don't get lost or forgotten. What shocks me is that when I start working with even successful farm families, over a third of the decisions that get made never get implemented. Improving the rate of success in putting ideas into practice changes the return on investment listed on your business's annual year-end statement by several percentage points. With most businesses I work with, we nearly double their level of profitability within 2 years. I know this is a bold statement that is hard to believe, but that is a fact. Think about how even moving your return on assets by 1% would change your business's viability. Not until you get ideas into reality can you realize profitability. Until then, you will only experience frustration. Second, accountability fosters trust within the family team. There is no double standard between generations whereby father knows best and power struggles occur. I had a family patriarch who built a $50 million company from a 60-cow herd dairy think that he was above being held accountable to following through on what he said he'd do. For 3 consecutive meetings, he consistently didn't follow through on the simple task of ordering a garbage bin, and garbage continued to pile up across the farm. His kids continued to do whatever they wanted because Dad set the example, and they lost complete trust in whatever their dad was saying. It was only when the patriarch started to live by the phrase, say what you'll do and do what you say, that everything fell into place. When you know that your family members are accountable, it strengthens the bond, mutual respect, and teamwork. Third, it helps in problem solving and adaptability. When you hold each other accountable, you become better at addressing challenges and adjusting your strategies as needed to stay successful. You learn to problem solve as a team until you get it right, getting better and better at the skill of team problem solving itself, so that no matter what happens in the future, there isn't a challenge your family can't solve together. You become bulletproof. Overall, learning to hold each other accountable in a family business team is like having a well-oiled machine where everyone plays their part in making sure the business not only survives, but thrives in the long run. It's key for lasting success and prosperity.
The larger logs.
As the fire can handle it, you add bigger and bigger logs. Within 6 months, Katie's family learned how to have more intelligent conversations without headbutting. About 9 months into the process, a neighboring farm that they rented came up for sale. 2 years before, they would have never considered bidding on it because Uncle Bob always thought farms were going for too much. But they were able to weigh the pros and cons of the decision at a whole different level. What they decided to do was to sever the house that was on the farm and sell gravel off the back end. Essentially, they were able to buy the farm for the same price as what they were already paying the neighbor for rent. They were able to have this conversation within 30 minutes, and everyone felt good about it. A year earlier, everyone would have been at odds with each other about what to do. Katie was floored because a year before there would have been no way that her uncle would have even considered discussing buying a farm, let alone signing a check. That is because over that year they had problem solved how they solved problems and dramatically evolved how they made decisions together. They started with time management and treating time like it's money, and then expanded into bigger decisions. You need to get your family stubborn at good habits such as listening or being empathetic. If you fix that, every decision is like clockwork. After 2 years, you can sit down to have an intelligent, strategic conversation like succession planning or business expansion without pride or egos getting in the way. Like I said, you have to fix the stubborn first.
Chapter 2. Heart. Start caring about others' needs and feelings, not just yours.
Abraham Maslow was a famous psychologist back in the 1940s who talked about people's needs. He made a pyramid showing the 5 basic needs at the bottom and the need to be the best version of oneself at the top. Each level represents a kind of need people have. Starting at the bottom, here are the 5 levels on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs pyramid. 1. Basic needs. In a family business, this means making sure it makes enough money to cover rent, bills, and food. 2. Safety needs. Once our basics are covered, we want to feel safe and secure. In a family business, this could be like having savings for a rainy day or insurance in case something goes wrong. 3. Social needs. We all want to feel loved and like we belong somewhere, right? In a family business, this is about everyone getting along, supporting each other, and feeling like they're part of the team. 4. Esteem needs. This is about feeling good about ourselves and being proud of our work. In a family business, it means being recognized for our hard work and feeling valued. 5. Self-actualization. This is the top of the pyramid. It's all about becoming the best version of ourselves by finding profound purpose in our lives, in what we do, and with who we are. In a family business, we can find it in owners who see past the day-to-day drudgery of work and find true fulfillment in who they have become through their work. This deep fulfillment or self-actualization is not something that is hidden under a bushel. It positively impacts everyone around them. When stuck at the esteem level, as most business owners are, many families will turn their work into their sense of identity and thus become completely reliant on their work to fulfill them. This can be dangerous, as you will see a little later in this chapter.
Stuck at esteem.
Whereas 56% of Americans in 2023 can't pay a $1,000 emergency, most established family-owned businesses perceive themselves as being at the top level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is the self-actualized level. In fact, most are stuck one notch down at the esteem level. In my opinion, this is a very dangerous place to put yourself because too often we make decisions at this level based on pride and self-esteem rather than rational behavior. I saw the negative impact from this emotional state and living color when my dad plowed my own crops under out of jealousy. At the esteem step, people want to feel good about themselves and be liked by others. But this can lead them to do things they later regret, especially in a family business. It's tough watching smart folks have these self-destructive traits, which I will list off to you now. 1. They have an incessant need for being liked. They make choices just because others think they are good. 2. They are scared of being turned down. They avoid things because they're scared of rejection or being laughed at. 3. They are constantly playing the comparison game. They keep looking at what others have, and they feel bad about themselves. 4. They want instant gratification. They choose what feels good now, but isn't great for them in the long term. As farmers and self-made businessmen and women, we are proud about how humble we are, and yet too often it is our pride that is our Achilles heel and causes empires to fall. I could give you over 100 examples of situations where level-headed farmers did irrational things out of pride and brought their farming empires crashing down. One example that sticks out to me is my buddy Matt's family.
From wonderful to that which has to go.
I dated a nice girl named Sadie while in college. I thought things were going well until she stopped returning my calls to go out on our next date. I saw her at the pub one night and asked her what happened. She was honest. She said I was a nice boy, but my dad didn't milk enough cows for the lifestyle she wanted. She dreamed of being a dairy farmer's wife, not a hillbilly's wife, and that was that. Later that spring, she hooked up with a buddy of mine. Matt came from one of the largest farms in Western Ontario. Although I was jealous and resented it at first, I got over it fast because they did make a good couple, and my buddy deserved to be married to a good girl. Matt was a really good guy who could talk your ear off about tractors, but didn't know what to say around girls, and it was really awesome to see Sadie bring out such a big smile on his face. A few years later, they had what I thought was the perfect wedding. It was obvious that the family had financed a $40,000 wedding and put a lot of effort into little details, from cutting the lawns to painting the fences, making the farm picture perfect. They had cut a maze into a cornfield and had a big white wedding tent with 300 guests in the middle of it, with tiki torches and antique tractors bordering the cornfield. The farm sat hundreds of miles from any city, and it was a perfect warm summer night where you could reach out and touch the stars. I have to laugh now, although it wasn't funny at the time, about the stark contrast between me and Matt as husband material. Earlier that week, my father had kicked me off the farm, yet again, and I was literally sleeping in my car without any direction in my life. I was picking up temporary work in the Caygeon meatpacking plant while spending my spare time in the university library reading farming magazines. I really thought that it was only a few weeks until my extended family would intervene, and this nightmare would all go away. But nobody ever made the effort. After being invited to Matt's wedding, I knew I had to drum up something to take as a gift. I couldn't really afford anything, but I was lucky to find this large plaque at a secondhand store. I put it in a fancy pink bag that cost more than the gift, if I remember correctly. You would have never guessed it was used unless someone told you. On the plaque was the Bible passage from 1 Corinthians 13, which read, "Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no records of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails." I remember putting on my suit for the wedding using the showers at the YMCA without having worked out at the gym. The secondhand gift was all about frugality and being broke, yet not losing face by showing up empty-handed. I liked the verse, but it really didn't mean anything special to me. After the reception dinner, I remember Matt's dad, Norm, getting up after the dinner, and in his speech he said, "Matt, we wondered for a very long time if you were going to be a bachelor for life. We couldn't get you to go out with any girls on a date. We thought you just might be a hopeless cause. But then you came home with Sadie, and I'm simply amazed. You found the perfect girl. She is not only a hard worker, but she is a lot of fun to be around and can make a hell of a good pie." Norm joked, smacking his lips. He went on to say how much his mom and him loved their son, but statistically, divorce is 50-50. And if that would ever happen, sorry, son, we love her way more than you. If you get divorced, she stays and you go. Everyone laughed hysterically, and I remember telling the story to a friend after because I was so impressed by it. Sadie became part of Matt and Norm's operation the day they tied the knot, and the joke that went around the community had been that she was so good with the cows, they had to buy a bigger milk tank. she had been able to improve milk production that much. About 5 years later, I got a call from Matt, and his voice was quivering over the phone. He didn't know what to do. I had just started doing farm succession planning, and I was the first guy that came to his mind. His dad and Sadie had a falling out, with Matt having to choose either the farm or Sadie. Apparently, the trouble had started earlier that week, when a feed salesman came to speak to Norm about the animals with a PhD nutritionist that came from the feed company's head office. Sadie had just finished her chores and joined in the conversation. Because she had a master's degree in dairy nutrition, she posed some good questions to the nutritionist and got right up into his face. She wanted to know why the cows weren't milking as she thought they should. While Norm was happy with their production levels, she thought they could push out an extra 5% more milk and went into detail about adding a feed additive. Soon the conversation went over Norm's head. Norm felt that Sadie had pushed him out of the conversation, and their relationship changed instantly. Within that moment, Norm thought that Sadie had gone from being the ideal daughter-in-law to the witch that had to go. Norm couldn't sleep that night, and the next morning he fired Sadie. Norm was only 58 years old and wasn't ready to give up control of the farm. At least that's what he thought was happening. "It's either me or her," he said to Matt, "and I'm not going anywhere for 5 years. She can go work somewhere else for 5 years because I'm tired of her being bossy. Matt, if you don't like it, then you can both bugger off and get your own farm. But if you do that, I'll cut you out of my will." In that moment, Norm wasn't thinking or caring about what Matt thought about the decision. He didn't think through the impact such a decision would have to Matt's marriage or happiness. Norm didn't respect the fact that Matt and Sadie together did the work of 5 employees, and the farm couldn't afford the wages it would take to replace their incredible work ethic and skills. Norm was simply obsessed with his own emotional needs and focused on instant gratification, rather than the long-term fallout of how it would impact family dynamics or the farm. Few people understand that for some people, the farm or family business is the center of their identity. The business is who they are. If there is even an inkling that it is being taken from them, they will go on the defensive. It's the same as a man defending his own heart from a knife. They can rationalize some pretty irrational things. Norm had spent his entire life building the business, and he was used to having people follow his instructions without question. He felt helpless, thinking that his kingdom was under attack. To watch someone else take the lead with a salesman felt like a huge betrayal to Norm. He felt that Sadie had somehow taken what was his, and because of that, she couldn't be trusted anymore. For this reason, he fired her. Sadie was devastated, to say the least. Her life was farming, and without it, she didn't have a reason to live. Sadie felt betrayed because her husband wouldn't stand up to his father. Sadie was in a dark place. Deeply depressed, she called her sister Emily, who had never liked Matt. Emily convinced Sadie to pack her bags and fly out west to visit her for the weekend. Due to high oil prices, Calgary was booming, and many were going there to start a new life. Matt called me in desperation because he knew that if Sadie got on that plane, his marriage was over.
The worst kind of stubbornness, narcissism.
When you're a successful farmer or business owner, you shape your world. It's your job to level mountains and create new ones by sheer determination. This is the worldview of a successful business person. The closer your reality aligns with your goals, the more successful you are. You're the boss. When you are a successful business owner, you have many employees who work for you. And when you say jump, they say, how high? Salesmen and service providers have the same attitude because they want your business. Within the community, people naturally look up to you because you have a respected farm or business. Your personal life and the schedule of what the family is doing is dictated by your schedule or the needs of the business. Your world becomes based on how you want it and when you want it. If it isn't how you want it, people get flack until they meet your expectations. For a lot of farmers and small family business owners, this business environment where everyone is subservient to your needs becomes toxic without anyone knowing it. You get surrounded by yes men, and they warp your sense of reality. By accident, you become narcissistic. Narcissism is the mental disorder of you. Sigmund Freud made an analogy of narcissism to childlike behavior, and I don't mean the innocent kind. Toddlers demand things and want them instantly, or they'll throw a temper tantrum. Or they play the victim and dish a platter of flattery until they get their way. They feel like this is only right because they are the only ones who matter, and their needs are more important than everyone else's. The business environment of running a farm had caused Norm to develop a narcissistic disorder over time, and the day I showed up, he had most of these 10 classic narcissistic traits that I read in a popular psychology magazine article. Let me list them off for you now. 1. Me-first mentality. They always put themselves before the needs of the business or their partner. 2. Attention craving. They seek constant recognition, often overshadowing others' contributions. 3. Lack of empathy. They struggle to understand or care about the feelings and concerns of colleagues or their spouse. 4. Exaggerated achievements. They brag excessively about their successes, downplaying others' efforts. 5. Exploitative behavior. They might use coworkers or their partner for personal gain without guilt. 6. Entitlement attitude. They feel entitled to special treatment, regardless of others' needs or priorities. 7. Jealousy and envy. They feel threatened by others' accomplishments and may undermine them. 8. Manipulative tactics. They use cunning methods to achieve their goals, often at others' expense. 9. Blame shifting. They avoid taking responsibility for errors, blaming coworkers or their spouse instead. 10. Defensiveness. They react fiercely to criticism, often turning it around on others rather than reflecting on their behavior. I had a roommate who called me out one day on being a narcissist. He took me to a coffee shop one Sunday and meant it to be an intervention. But I really had no idea what he was talking about. Honestly, I just didn't take it seriously. This frustrated him a lot. Looking back at who I was and how I dealt with people, he was probably right in his diagnosis. A decade later, when I got married to my wife, she was blown away when I told her this story. She felt I was the exact opposite of that. Well, at least most of the time, no one's perfect. But yeah, she's given me one or two compliments over the years. But for me, that is one of the best ones. In working with Matt's family, I learned a lot and tried to apply these lessons to my own life. I shared this part of my life because, against popular opinion, I do believe narcissism is not a permanent disorder. We can all be a bit narcissistic by nature, especially in difficult times. Whereas narcissism was once thought to be genetic, or that a person had to check a certain number of boxes in order to have this disorder, many now believe its onset is heavily influenced by environment and circumstances. I believe it's on the spectrum, something like autism. When dealing with intense family business crises such as farm debt and farm succession, I've seen the stress of these circumstances bring out the worst quality in people, where they become hyper-focused on their immediate short-term emotional needs and lose perspective of the needs or concerns of others. A true narcissist will never admit to being a narcissist. But regardless of whether we check all the boxes to have this personality disorder, these traits don't exemplify the best in ourselves or the DNA of what makes successful partnerships. Whether you are in a marriage or a family business, these are the character traits that cause partnerships to be dysfunctional. Often, I'd see a son or daughter calling the family patriarch a narcissist, but the truth was that the pot was calling the kettle black. Upon deeper reflection, I realized that I had called my dad narcissistic and stubborn. And he was. Yet at the same time, so was I. The truth was that it wasn't just Norm alone that displayed narcissistic traits. Sadie was starting to develop a few of them as well. She was often defensive, sometimes made brash statements that lacked empathy, and could be manipulative as well. She wasn't completely the victim as she thought herself to be. The problem on that farm was that both Sadie and Norm were both narcissistic. They had let their pride and egos drive decisions, which led to a lose-lose situation for everyone. This narcissism is what caused the downfall of my own parents' marriage and our seventh-generation family farm. Pride and teamwork built it, but ultimately, it was pride that caused my father to plow my crops under. I was hell-bent on not letting this happen to this great family. After getting the call from Matt, I didn't sleep. The truth was, I didn't know what to say or do. They were in a situation nobody would want to be in, and my buddy was relying on me to fix it. When you are an alcoholic, all you need to do to start changing is pour the beer down the drain and stop drinking. However, becoming self-aware of when you are being jealous or manipulative is tougher to do. Most narcissists will never admit to having fault. Research has shown that nearly 60% of all marriages to narcissists, male or female, end in divorce. If you go to the online course platform Udemy, you'll see 14 courses on how to deal with a narcissist, and they all come to the same conclusion. The only solution is to leave that person. If you Google narcissism, you'll quickly see that most psychologists will ultimately recommend divorcing the person. if they refuse to change. It is very, very rare for a narcissist to actually change. In this situation, there was no way in hell that Norm was going to admit to any fault. He was going to double down on his bad decisions, and it was going to lead to a very dire situation which would split that family. Neither was Sadie going to admit to any fault. She was the victim and would be abrasive if I ever brought up to her how she was sometimes harsh and unempathetic. Late that sleepless night, as I read over the list of signs of narcissism in front of me on my laptop, I couldn't help but think how messed up their situation was. Both Sadie and Norm were stubborn individuals, to an extreme. As I laid awake in bed that night, I thought how ironic it was that the traits of a narcissist are the exact opposite of the traits of what it took to be a good spouse or business partner. Then, in the middle of the night, it hit me.
Lean into it.
What if we identify what the traits of a narcissist are and do the exact opposite? Instead of trying to pretend that we're not narcissistic, why not lean into it? Why not recognize what narcissistic traits are and then say boldly that we all bear these traits from time to time? Because here is the reality. We are family business owners and are self-made men and women who live and work and find our deep passion within what we do. In other words, we are living the dream, right? At the very same time, it is also the place and environment that caters to the development of narcissism. When narcissism becomes rampant, then our dream turns into a living nightmare. If we recognize this and renounce it at the same time, we can build or rebuild a business and family culture that is free of these destructive traits. The time to stop pretending that we don't have them, or that will never be me, is now. Let's be honest with ourselves that we can and do bear these sins and get stubborn with ourselves. Instead of having a mediation whereby both Sadie and Norm would accuse each other of being narcissistic, I thought, why not identify what narcissistic traits are and then write up some common sense principles that they all can accept and adapt to their farm's culture. Rather than focusing on what they don't want and get into a blaming and shaming game, they focus on what they do want and can come together to make it happen. I sat down at the computer at 3 a.m. when I had this thought and wrote out values that represented the opposite of what narcissistic traits were. The sign read, "Our family farm's culture statement. Together we thrive, divided we fall. To succeed, we have to shift from a me to we mindset. We will achieve this by adapting these 5 principles. 1. Always be humble and empathetic. Always consider everyone's needs and feelings, not just your own. 2. Take responsibility. Always focus on problem-solving root issues without blame or playing defense. 3. Never feel entitled to more than you've earned. Work hard to earn everyone's respect daily. 4. Treat everyone with kindness, respect boundaries, and never take advantage of anyone. 5. Never need praise or be envious. Be grateful and daily appreciate others' contributions." I rushed to Staples at 8 a.m. in Listowel, trying to get the copy lady to print out these values on a laminate sign. I also had the copy lady print off an article listing the top 10 traits of a narcissist for each family member, which I intended to distribute with the posters at the meeting to show how the principles I wrote were the opposite. Slow as molasses would be an understatement of how the blue-haired hipster at the copy center functioned. I drove like a bat out of hell to get to the farm on time.
Things take a turn at the kitchen table.
It was bitterly cold when I walked across the farmyard and into Matt and Sadie's kitchen. Norm and his wife were waiting in their truck by the milkhouse and followed me into the house. I was shocked to see Sadie's suitcases by the door. She didn't just have a weekend bag. There were 2 very large suitcases, and it was obvious that Matt's concerns about her leaving him were real. They had a beautiful, quaint kitchen with the right blend of all the modern conveniences and country charm. What surprised me the most was to see the 1 Corinthians 13 plaque I'd given them staring me square in the face when I stepped through the door. Besides their huge barnboard dining table, the plaque was the central feature of the kitchen with all their family photos surrounding it. To have a mediation with Sadie just being fired in a fit of rage while sitting across the kitchen table from Norm was a very weird moment that I'll never forget. I sat in the middle of the table on a long bench facing Matt and his mother. Sadie and Norm were on opposite ends. That cold house was so quiet that you could hear the grandfather's clock ticking in the next room. I started off the meeting by having everyone read the article on the top 10 qualities of a narcissist. It was very awkward. The last time I was on their farm was at Matt and Sadie's wedding. It was a great day, and everyone had so much fun. I would never have dreamed what was to happen 5 years later, or that I'd be sitting in their kitchen, not as a guy sharing a pie with and talking about the good old times, but as a mediator who was about to talk about how this great family had fallen victim to one of the worst forms of stubbornness, narcissism. Norm gave me a very dark glance, and then I said, "When you get married, you promise before God, family, and friends to put your spouse's needs before your own. You have your family standing behind you, pledging that they'll do everything to make your marriage successful as well. Narcissism is the antithesis to what it takes to have a successful marriage. In a strong marriage, both partners value mutual respect, understanding, and the ability to compromise. But someone with narcissistic tendencies tends to focus mostly on their own needs, struggles to empathize with their partner, and often places their own desires and feelings above all else. This can lead to a lot of one-sided decisions and a lack of emotional support. Instead of being a team, it becomes more about one person's show, and that can really strain the bond of marriage or a business partnership. The problem isn't an issue with a daughter-in-law being too bossy or a farmer feeling embarrassed that he doesn't know everything about dairy nutrition. I think the problem at hand here is that you folks aren't acting as a family or a business team, but as individuals, where everyone is looking out for themselves." I took out a blank piece of paper from my briefcase bag. "From the conversations I had with each of you before this meeting, I can clearly see that everyone is acting out of their own self-interests. No one is focusing on what it means to have a successful farm and family, but rather everyone is acting out of fear."
Success and succession.
What if you guys focus on success rather than fear? And in that moment, I wrote out the word succession, letter by letter, just like this. Succession. Succession, I read out loud. The thing about succession is that it can be broken into two different words. Success and the Latin suffix, ion. And with that, I divided succession and ion with a line. Words that end in ion often show an action or process, and many of these can relate to change, like transformation or evolution. Or transition, piped in Matt. Yeah, exactly. These words all talk about some sort of change, just in different ways. The problem with your farm is that you all fear changes in the future of the farm. Fear of losing control, fear of not being validated, fear of distrust, fear of losing your identity, fear of not being always right, fear of losing your relationships, fear of having to choose between family, fear of walking on eggshells for years, fear of losing your marriage, fear of losing the farm, fear of a nightmare succession battle. I could have gone on, but I could see Sadie on the verge of tears. "But what can we do?" Matt said, agitated, wringing his hands. "Everything feels hopeless right now." "You guys need to focus on change, but not in fear. Focus on what success looks like and what changes must be made for the farm to be successful and everyone to be happy in the future. It starts with you folks not acting out of self-interest, but everyone focusing on acting like family. This starts with killing narcissism within your family and business culture." I said, before we start talking about succession, we must focus on success, not fears. I always thought of this farm as heaven on earth. How can we make it that way for everyone? We need to get you guys better at talking about the ion or the changes to this business that you need to make to create a farm to be proud of, without pride and egos getting in the way. That starts not with you guys being stubborn with each other, but being stubborn on yourselves to daily be the partner anyone would want to work with. That starts with this not being his farm or her farm, but our heaven on earth that we are building together. This isn't accomplished by you putting your needs first, but everyone putting family first. You must kill the narcissism on this farm and start working together as the team I know you can be. From my briefcase, I then pulled laminated signs I had printed up the hour before and gave one to each family member. Narcissistic traits are the opposite of what makes a good team, I continued to explain. These 5 rules tie in several principles that flip narcissistic qualities on their head and replace them with 5 principles that will bring positive behavioral changes. I asked, what would happen if you adapted these 5 principles for your family business? They all looked at me stunned for a moment, but as they looked over the article on narcissism and then the rules, you could see the light bulbs turning on and everyone's body language opening up. The weight of the world fell off my shoulders when Sadie looked up from the sheet of paper with her tear-streaked face and smiled at me. About 30 seconds later, Norm looked up from staring down at the poster with his bifocal and said without a word more, "Sounds good." On the car drive to their farm, I had rehearsed those lines a dozen times, and it was obvious that they resonated with the family. But at the same moment, I could not take my eyes off of that plaque I had given to the couple at their wedding. Over and over, I kept reading the verse on the wall. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no records of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. It was an awkward pause when I grabbed the poster of my principles from Sadie's hands. In that moment, I seen the similarities between what I had written at 3 a.m. that morning and the message that was clearly stated on the wall. I had heard that verse said at pretty much every wedding I attended, but it was just in that moment the true meaning of it hit me like a frying pan. Matt and Sadie had their family photos surrounding that verse on that wall-papered kitchen wall. Happy moments at their wedding, happy moments on the farm with each other, and special times with their extended family. There was a happy photo of the first time Sadie had ever milked cows with Matt and Norm before they got married. And I realized that for this couple, for this entire farm family and farm to survive, the challenge wasn't to put academic principles into reality, but a few simple words of wisdom from the Bible that we too often take for granted: to love sincerely and to put others' needs before our own. Seconds before I was well scripted, but in that moment, the adrenaline kicked in. I couldn't tell you exactly what I said in that moment of ditching what I had written and going with scripture instead, but they all agreed with it, sincerely. Sadie did come back from her sister's after that weekend, and although there were a few awkward moments, I helped them put their faith into reality behind the barn over the next year. 10 months later, Sadie had a boy she proudly named Norm. I don't know what is going on today apart from a growing family Christmas card every year, but I'd bet my bottom dollar that little Norm is milking cows with his grandpa and mom tonight. All because everyone put family first and learned to put their faith into reality behind the barn.
How do you like the book so far? If you like the book, please share it by texting the link to your friends, advisors, local family businesses, and most importantly, your family. Let's turn stubborn from a bad word into a good thing for family-owned businesses. Chapter 3. Left hand. Stop pointing fingers and focus on the 3 pointing back.
When John called me out to his farm over the phone, he said, "We have problems working together. Can you come and help us?" But after our private meeting at his kitchen table earlier that morning, it was obvious that he felt that all the problems were his brother's, not his. The way that John described his older brother Gerald, you would think he was describing Hitler. Gerald was a classic narcissist who had high expectations about what needed to be done, and when it wasn't done his way, he had anger management issues. John said, "There is no doubt in anyone's mind that Gerald isn't hard-working. He is just hard to work with." His wife sat beside her husband, nodding in agreement and interjecting a word here and there. In meeting with Gerald an hour later, he described John to me as being lazy and unreliable. He was fine during the busy times of the year, like spring planting or fall harvest, but there would be days in the middle of summer and months in the winter where he'd show up to work but get nothing done. He would spend half the day socializing with employees and salesmen, having accomplished very little beyond basic chores by day's end. He'd start projects but not finish them, and was always behind with critical tasks. When it came time to drive equipment into the field, he'd still be doing basic machinery maintenance like changing the oil, which could have been done in February. Their crops were always late getting in and always yielded less than the neighbors as a result. They didn't get the yields and had to buy feed, which really impacted their dairy farm's bottom line. John simply had no concept of the value of time and had no accountability. This drove Gerald nuts, and Gerald said to me more than twice, "John is just riding on my coattails." Both men had faults, and both men had ample reasons to be frustrated with each other. But both were good guys. They just both had faults that were holding them back from realizing their fullest potential. After John spent 45 minutes telling me the many problems he had in working with his brother, I asked him, "What is it like farming with your brother on a good day?" He looked at me sharply like a deer caught in the headlights. For about 30 seconds, he refused to give any compliments, and getting him to give even a superficial compliment was like drawing blood from a stone. But I pressed him, and to my surprise, John just broke down sobbing. Not a silent tear. He broke down hard, and sounded like a toddler wailing. Eventually, he said between the sobs that, "On a good day, it is a good day, but the problem is that they have become too rare lately." His wife looked at me and muttered under her breath that I've never seen him cry before, except at his dad's funeral. She was shocked. What was obvious was that although the two brothers were at odds with each other, they were also best friends who deeply cared for each other, and that is what made it so hard to deal with the idea of splitting up. John felt such huge sorrow because when he woke up every morning, he didn't know which version of Gerald was going to show up to work: Dr. Jekyll, the hero, or Mr. Hyde, the monster. Nobody wants to work with a jerk. Nobody wants to work with a partner who isn't giving it their all. Nobody wants to work with a partner who has the potential to be better, yet doesn't make the effort. This is the silent truth that causes friction in family businesses and literally has partners crying buckets when they finally bring it out of the closet. Nobody is fully aware of all their faults, but we all know of pet peeves that drive our business partners, let alone our spouses, crazy. Yet we choose to ignore them. Our attitude is, "You're stuck with me. Deal with it." This entitlement is how partnerships and marriages fail. It doesn't matter who you are, everyone has a dark side. Even the most pious, well-liked man or woman in your community has 5% of their character that is undesirable and hard to tolerate. You wouldn't be either married or involved with a family business if you only saw the dark side in a family business partner. You marry Dr. Jekyll or the hero you see in a person. However, every day across America, business partnerships and marriages are falling apart because the dark side of their partners comes out more days than can be tolerated, which is the wrong type of consistency.
Is divorce the answer?
In those 2 private morning meetings that I had with each brother and their wife, they all said that they wanted to work things out and improve the nature of the farming partnership. However, that afternoon, when I sat down with the 2 couples and their mother to mediate the situation, things went off the rails within minutes. As I sat there opposite the mother at one end of the table and the 2 couples opposite each other on both sides, I could see a stark fear seep into everyone's minds, causing tempers to flare. This business wasn't just their livelihood. It was everything to them, ranging from where they lived to family relationships. They fought with each other as if someone was coming to kidnap their child. The farm was everything to them. The words that were coming out of the sisters-in-law's mouths were vicious and completely out of character. Everyone got defensive, and accusations for past mistakes started getting thrown around. I tried to get everyone to focus on one issue at a time, but everyone continued to deflect and bring up unrelated past grievances. It was obvious that they didn't have me out there to problem solve some issues or improve how they worked together as a team. They had me out there to get a divorce. Brother from brother and sister-in-law from sister-in-law. They had me out to the farm to act as a judge as to who was in the right. Like so many past farms I had worked with, I felt I was in divorce court yet again. It wasn't long before I had realized something disturbing about that analogy to divorce and the breaking up of business partnerships. I had recently found out the statistical fact that many couples who go to see a marriage counselor end up in a divorce within 4 years after. I was very shocked by this. Most couples don't go to a counselor to learn from past mistakes, realize what they did wrong, and improve themselves. They go to the counselor for a moment of vengeance and redemption. They go to the counseling session to complain to the counselor about their partner's behavior and to get the counselor to take their side. Their hope is that the counselor will tell their partner in a different way what their partner is doing wrong and get them to change their behavior. They hope that their partner will realize their errors in the past and ask for forgiveness. They go to the session with the counselor for the purpose of pushing their perspective onto their partner, not to learn their partner's perspective and to learn about what they can do to improve themselves. If their partner didn't change their behavior because of the counselor's suggestions, then the next step would be divorce. I realized this is what my mediation attempts were turning into. I had been doing mediation for several years up to this moment with dozens of farm families, and to be perfectly honest, I was slowly getting burnt out. I was becoming more and more frustrated with how often I'd sit down with stubborn partners who told me they wanted to work things out, but it would turn into a fight where I'd become the judge in a blame game. Not just any judge either, but a divorce court judge. I knew that was not what my life's mission was about. The thought of throwing in the towel crossed my mind at that table as I felt my whole profession was futile.
What about 4-H for adults?
Exasperated by the situation, I turned toward the window only to see the eldest grandson in the front yard. I was told he was going to be the fifth generation to farm, and remembered how highly John spoke about this kid. John didn't have much good to say about his brother Gerald, but for his nephew, Levi, he had only kind words to say. John was really impressed that Levi got out of bed every morning at 4 a.m. to milk cows before he got on the school bus. "That kid lives to farm," he said. Levi was roughly 16, and he was leading his 4-H calf in the farmyard, just outside the kitchen window. The calf was being stubborn like a mule, but Levi wasn't giving in, pulling on the calf halter to get the calf to lead. For those of you who don't know, 4-H is a community service club focused on youth development. You probably have seen farm kids showing cattle and horses at your state fair. As referenced earlier in this book, the 4-H motto is "Learn to do by doing," and is all about learning practical skills through projects, many of them working with animals. It takes a lot of work to train a cow to walk on what is essentially a dog leash and to groom a sow until she looks pretty. It takes dedication and overcoming challenges to do this, but more importantly, it is about becoming a better person through the challenges that hard work puts in front of a kid. I thought it ironic that the farm was bringing out the best in the kid, yet that meeting in the kitchen was bringing out the worst in his parents. Why? His parents were being the wrong type of stubborn. Almost every farmer I've met in the 16 long years I've been doing what I do is some guy or gal I'd love to sit at a kitchen table and share a pie with. But I also know that no one is perfect. There is no perfect farmer out there. Everyone has 5% of their character or performance that, if tweaked, could solve more than 50% of their issues. And for a business, fixing those 50% of issues can quickly lead to doubling their business's profitability and make working with family fun again. Yes, Levi's parents and his aunt and uncle were good people, but they allowed their stubbornness to become a wedge between them. None of them would budge in admitting that they had played any part in the problems on the farm. Everyone was viciously defending themselves, pointing fingers, and trying to shift blame onto their partners. This stubbornness grew into destructive habits that were all coming out that day. Everyone was talking over each other, nobody was listening. They were all obsessed with being right rather than making things right. They failed to address business or production problems because no one wanted to admit to any fault in their area of responsibility. Instead, they tended to double down on bad decisions leading to money slipping between the cracks right under their noses. Everything from day-to-day operations to long-term strategy was in limbo because no one wanted to get in the same room together to discuss anything or be told what to do by their partners. Respect for each other had long flown the coop, making it a very toxic environment for everyone, including employees who were quitting left and right due to the drama. How ironic is it that we encourage our farm kids to be in 4-H for the purpose of self-improvement? Yet once we are past the age of eligibility to be in 4-H, we pretend we are perfect and refuse to change? How is it that a farm creates such good character in a kid? Yet too often for farmers, it brings out the worst in adults on the farm. In baseball, major league athletes who get drafted as an amateur and stay in their professional leagues for long careers do so not just based on natural talent, but their ability to recognize faults, be coached, and self-improve. It's the same with business. Whether you are playing below the amateur level or as an all-star professional depends on what type of stubborn you are. Whether you blame your inabilities on others by being stubborn at taking advice, or you learn to listen to advice and self-improve, dictates the difference between success and failure. In sports, what dictates a team's success isn't luck. It is the ability of the team to be the best version of themselves by being stubborn at self-improvement throughout the year. This family at the kitchen table was a devout Christian farm family who read the Bible together after each meal. Their Bible was on the kitchen table. It was open to Matthew 7:5, where the words of Jesus were written in red. "You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." It doesn't matter if you are Catholic, Protestant, atheist, Buddhist, or if you believe Elvis is still alive. These are profound words that can change any family business. You can't control the actions of others, but you can control your own actions. And it's only when you focus on changing your behavior that you get positive changes in your life. In that moment of seeing the kid leading his 4-H calf and glancing over at Matthew 7:5, a lot of things clicked all at once. What would happen if we simply worked on one fault at a time? What would happen if instead of denying it and shifting blame, Each partner leaned into their weaknesses and worked diligently over a month to replace it with a better habit. Instead of pointing fingers, focus on the three fingers pointing back at you and fix yourself first. What would happen if every month each partner identified one bad habit that they have in working together with teammates and turned it from a weakness into a strength? I believe that for every challenge you have in life, you either have an incorrect belief, a character flaw, or a skill deficiency. Or in other words, you have bad habits or weaknesses that need to be turned into good habits and become your strengths. Either you rise above the challenge and learn a valuable lesson to self-improve, or it causes you and your team to self-destruct. You aren't in control of another's actions, but you are in control of your own actions. And it's only when you take personal responsibility to change what you can change, not what others can change, that your family business, marriage, or personal life will change for the better.
The big question. If everyone within your partnership picked out one bad habit each month and worked on turning it from a personal weakness into a strength over 30 days, and then your team collectively identified one bad habit that everyone has in common each month, and together as a team you work on turning that bad habit from a weakness into a strength, how much different would your business partnership be in 12 months? Think about that. Chapter 4. Right Hand. How to focus on the three fingers pointing back.
The moment when I read Matthew 7:5 on that farm in that heated, seemingly hopeless situation, it changed my life in many ways. It changed the focus of my life's work, from mediating family disputes where everyone would throw stones at each other, to working with each family member and the entire team to evolve who they are and get to the real root of problems. It changed my perspective of how I viewed what happened with my own family, and I realized I still felt like the victim when in actuality I was to blame too. It was time for me to guide farm families from pointing fingers at each other to acknowledging those three fingers pointing back and do something about it. For close to a decade now since that moment, I have been doing just that. I've used coaching and advanced tools of habit training and business management to transform bickering, unhappy families into a real team that can take on the world together. There is no perfect way to farm, and there is no perfect way to be. There are many ways to live your life. Everyone has different talents and opportunities. What I care about most is that you don't just have potential and waste it, but tweak the bad habits that hold you back from realizing your dreams by first realizing your fullest potential. Be the best version of yourself, and more critically, be the partner anyone would want to work with. I have simplified the change process into 5 small steps for you so you can start seeing results in your operation right away. To make it easy to remember, I think about it in terms of each of a person's 5 fingers: thumb, pointer, middle ring, and pinky. My 5-finger method looks like this. First step, thumb. We've all hit our thumb when trying to hit a nail into a board. In a similar way, identify those habits you have that are repeatedly messing up your day and make you just want to suck your thumb. Those habits that make you stumble or fall flat on your face. Those habits that your partners or spouse calls you out on too many times. Those habits that make you lose your time, energy, peace, and happiness. Those habits that make you go home in a miserable mood. Remember, this part is about you, not your partner's bad habits. But yes, you are right. What your partner says and does can affect you and ruin your day, but only if you let it. If you want to speed up this self-reflection, take a look at the list we provide in the appendix of the book, or simply download these resources from my website, www.stubborn.farm/resources. It doesn't matter who you are, you can at least find one thing on that list that is a bad habit that if you tweaked it and turned it into a good habit, would make your farm better. Second step, pointer finger. Now you have your list of bad habits. What next? Point to where you want to go. Simply ask yourself the question, who do you want to be? It is time to identify your identity, your new self. If you can get rid of those bad habits and replace them with good habits, if you can turn those weaknesses into strengths, how would you describe your new self? One farmer I recently coached identified several habits, including being late to work, not efficiently prioritizing his work in the shop, and turning molehills into mountains. But he understood the task and broadened his perspective. The truth is that if you were honest with yourself, you could probably come up with at least a dozen things you could work on. But the key is to just pick one and then actually make it happen over the next month. Then take on other improvements once you've got one under your belt. Turning our bad habits into good habits is one thing, but taking off the old and putting on the new self is another thing. This guy wanted to go from an unreliable and angry man to a dependable and good-humored partner and husband. His wife got that mantra engraved on a jackknife. That's who he wanted his family to remember him as, and it is in that new identity that he is continually motivated to stick to his new habits. Third step, middle finger. Because this is the third step, I think of it as the middle finger, and my question to you is how you are going to prevent yourself from falling into the trap where your partners give you the middle finger because you aren't following through with the changes you said you'd make. Probably, if you said you were going to show up to work 5 minutes early and you keep showing up late, your partners will want to give you the finger. So what are those new habits? What are those things that will replace and ultimately get rid of those bad habits you identified in step 1? What will help to point you in the right direction, an inch closer to who you want to be? The new self you identified in step 2? You probably graded yourself a couple times with an F when you looked over those lists of bad habits from our resource page. I don't want you to get burnt out or demotivated by choosing the hardest things to change first. Don't get on the top rung of the ladder. Choose the lowest hanging fruit instead. Choose a single weakness that is easy but impactful, that if you turn it into a strength, you will be eager to move on to the next habit change. Let's go back to our previous example, the farmer who was constantly late to work. As a result, he got less done. He screwed up his partner's schedules and lost respect from his partners. What's the good habit he put in place? He was quick to text me back. Value everyone's time, not just mine. Perfect, I replied. This is what he decided to do about it. 1. Set an alarm for 15 minutes before I have to leave the house to go to work. 2. If I am going to be late, text my partners to let them know. 3. Punch in with a time card, even though I am salary, and hold myself accountable. 4. Make sure my phone will be out of reach as soon as I go to bed, so I don't stay up for another hour, wasting my time. Fourth step, ring finger. This next step of the process I liken to your ring finger, meaning how are you going to make this habit stick so that it positively impacts your business relationship with your partner for your lifetime? In other words, what is it going to take to make this marriage work? You can think of this as an analogy to being in business or your actual marriage. It comes down to spending 5 minutes every day, writing out your goals twice, and evaluating how you did at the day's end. That's it, and nothing more. These 2 minutes in the morning and 3 minutes at night, jotting down your goals can, in fact, change everything for you. But let me say this up front. Most farmers I work with find journaling one of the hardest things to turn into a habit. It usually takes a couple months for them to even come around to the idea. And I'm certainly not one to judge, because 25 years ago I would have said this is a bunch of hogwash. Well, guess what? I am not farming today because my dad and I got lost in the hogwash and didn't focus on what really mattered. Writing out your goals will bring what you want most into focus every day. I call it the boot journal. I call it the boot journal because I recommend keeping a notebook in the spot where you sit down to put your boots on and take them off daily. This notebook can simply be a cheap, 97-cent, spiral-bound, pocket-sized composition book. Nothing fancy. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of doing this beside your boots, not by your coffee maker, bedstand, or desk. Otherwise, it will never happen on busy days. You sit down in that spot twice daily, and it's at a time when sitting down for an extra minute isn't going to throw off your day's schedule. We need to make this process as easy as possible so that writing out your goals before you put your boots on in the morning, and then again, before you take them off at night, just makes sense. It needs to become part of your everyday life. Using the same farmer example from the previous steps, he now takes an extra few minutes in the morning to write out 2 simple things. The mantra of who he wants to be, dependable and good-humored partner and husband, and the new habit he chose to help him get there, value everyone's time, not just mine. Then when he is done for the day and sits down to take his boots off, he will write these 2 things out again and add 1 extra minute to grade himself from A to F on how well he implemented them that day. If he was late for work by only a couple minutes, he would give himself a D. If he was late to work by more than a few minutes and didn't text his partners he was running late, he would give himself an F. By scoring himself daily, it has slowly changed his behavior, whereby instances of him coming late to work have been fewer and farther between each other, and his partners have been commenting on how he has become so much more dependable. Whatever the outcome is for you, end the day on a good note. At the very least, you accomplished this reflective moment to do better tomorrow, and that is something to celebrate. Journaling for many feels like a waste of time, and something maybe that is even embarrassing for a few. However, it's hard to deny the power that it holds. Journaling is scientifically proven to reduce stress, improve cognitive function, and help you reach your goals. In fact, scientists found the simple act of writing out your goals activates the part of the brain that is used for sorting what's important. So, when you write down your new identity and your new habit, your brain is literally being trained to focus on them. With New Year's resolutions, 60% of people abandon them within 6 months, and more than 25% abandon them within 7 days. But scientific studies have shown that you are 42% more likely to achieve your goals if you write them down. Writing your goals down not only forces you to get clear on what exactly it is that you want to accomplish, but doing so plays a part in motivating you to complete the task necessary for your success. The act of writing out what you want to become keeps you focused on what absolutely matters, and you are thus less likely to get trapped in the emotions of day-to-day operations. Don't worry about spelling or grammar when you journal. This exercise is only for you to read, not for others. Recently, I had a Zoom meeting to check up with a farmer in Kansas, who had promised 2 months ago to his partners that he was going to write out his new habit every day, which was recognize one little win each day. The honest truth when I pressed him on it was last month he didn't do it. Instead, he put a yellow sticky note on the doorway to his office with that slogan. And for a few days, he honestly tried to make changes in his behavior. But then he got mired down in the chaos of day-to-day operations and reverted to his old ways. I put all the professional capital I had with him on the line and said, just do this for a month and see how it will change your life. Over the next month, he finally did it. He still is crusty from time to time, but you could just see by his 2 sons' expressions on their faces what a different guy he had become. Neurolinguistic programming, NLP, is like a toolkit for your mind that helps you understand and change your thoughts and behaviors. When it comes to transforming bad habits into good ones, daily journaling is like your personal coach. By writing down your thoughts and feelings every day, you become more aware of your habits and triggers. This awareness helps you stay focused on your goal of changing those habits. It's like shining a flashlight on the things you want to change, making it easier to replace the bad habits with good ones over time. So, NLP helps you understand your mind, and daily journaling is your practical tool for staying on track with your habit transformation journey. It really doesn't matter to me what new habit you choose as long as it happens. And it's never going to become reality until you change the underlying habit of setting up the framework for your mind as you put your work boots on to go to work and come home from work. From years of bringing this journaling exercise to the table for farmers, I can firmly say the science of journaling is profound. Words hold the power to change minds. When your words form your story, they have the power to change your life. It's that simple yet that profound. Last step, pinky. This last part of the process involves all your partners, and I like to think of it as your pinky swear. To change your business culture and your partnership for the better, it takes everybody joining in on changing themselves. Pretty straightforward, but not straightforward to do. Like so many other things in life, things don't start to happen until you make the first move. Change starts with you. But part of this process of continuous self-improvement is making your partners aware of your efforts, making them understand that you are making that first move, that you are ready and willing to see this partnership become better and stronger. The pinky swear involves a few commitments. An easy way for you to show your partners that you are serious about making a change in your behavior is to make a pledge, a pinky swear, so to speak. Say to your partners, if you don't see me make this one habit change this month, the next time we go to the local diner, I have to tip the waitress $100. Then invite them to provide their feedback and accountability. How am I doing? Should be a monthly question you ask your partners. Put yourself out there. The worst case scenario is that you are going to have to tip your waitress $100. That accountability will sting, but in the next month, whatever habit you choose to take on as a challenge, you'll probably do everything you can to not lose that money. In this humbling process, perhaps you will learn a better way to kick that old habit, or better yet, everyone sees your improvement and your partners want to jump on board as well. This is the ripple effect, and is one of the best parts of the whole process. I'm not going to guarantee that your partners will follow suit, but they most probably will. That is because you first put yourself out there and demonstrated leadership through action, not just words. And if your family can get in the habit of going out for a breakfast meeting monthly and have that friendly threat of each partner having to tip the waitress 100, your business will have a lot of positive changes within a year.
Family business is emotional.
This whole habit training and goal journaling process I just outlined might all sound great in theory, and you hopefully are convinced by now of how life-changing it is. But I am going to be my own devil's advocate here. It does have the power to turn around any family business, but your biggest hurdle will likely be your family business. It is way too easy to make excuses and rationalize bad habits when you are in a toxic family environment where your family members irritate you daily. You rationalize your bad habits. If he does this, then I am justified to do that. On a family farm or really any family business, we don't just inherit teacups in the family business from grandma. We form and inherit bad habits and false beliefs starting from childhood, and we bring those into our business partnership and our marriage. When something is so ingrained into our DNA, it is nearly impossible to change. Whether it's a bad temper that you learned from your grandpa who was a Korean War vet with PTSD, or you have a hard time being empathetic because your dad taught you to just suck it up because his girl doesn't cry. It all adds up. Like inheriting genes, these bad habits are traits we inherited innocently. However, like cancer, these are things that must be addressed so they don't become problematic and ruining your life. To do the nearly impossible, you have to rewire your mind. It's easier said than done. If you got a new job in a new state, it would be 10 times easier to change a bad habit. However, for a farm kid, you're probably in the family business you grew up in, and where many of your current bad habits were formed. You probably grew up playing with toys beside your mom's desk, while she did the farm's bookkeeping and played in the sandpile while dad did the chores. And like most farm kids, your first real job as a teenager was in the family business, working alongside your parents and cousins. If you worked in a completely new workplace and a stranger told you that you need to step up and change this so-and-so bad habit, it is more than likely that you will take that advice and do what is necessary to keep your position. However, it is not so for a family business. A family member telling you that you need to do something differently can easily get you off track. Or in other words, nagging you, bossing, controlling, belittling, screaming, arguing, and so on. It is easy to make excuses for your bad habits. For example, you might be in a partnership with an uncle with whom you have had more than 20 years of friction. The emotional baggage of all those past issues would come into play if he dared to tell you that you needed to change. It's like an unlit match. Yes, it does pose a danger, but if it's beside a fuel tank, emotional baggage affiliated with working with your uncle in the past, it's 10 times more dangerous. Family businesses are 10 times more emotionally charged than other workplaces, and our emotions often cause us to become derailed from achieving our ultimate goals. As a 12-year-old boy, I rode my grandpa's huge Clydesdale bareback, using just a bridle to steer him. I weighed 90 pounds and that horse weighed 2,000. He could have easily done whatever he wanted to do, but I controlled him using just that bridle bit. However, sometimes I would just try to save time and jump on that horse in the middle of the pasture field, trying to steer that horse without a bridle. That horse might listen a little bit, but ultimately he would do whatever he wanted. Ultimately, I'd be sitting out in the middle of a hayfield with that horse chewing on the grass or running down the road scared because he did whatever he felt like doing, and almost always, it was not what I wanted. This relates to life too. How often do our emotions put us in a spot we don't want to be? Numerous scientific studies have proven that more than 90% of our decisions are emotional, not rational. As redneck farmers and businessmen and women, we often convince ourselves that we aren't woke and are a lot more level-headed than the average person in society. But make no mistake about it, family businesses are emotional. The truth is, within a family business, we are even more vulnerable to making decisions based on emotion, far more than we realize or ever care to admit. Farming empires are built by decades of rational behavior and fall apart with just a few moments of emotions, causing irrational decisions to be made. Like my dad plowing my crops under in a fit of rage and jealousy. Think of how one critical comment from a parent can cause you to get irrationally angry and go for days without speaking to each other. And I have met too many people who have gone years without speaking. Our rational behavior is like that 90-pound boy. And our emotional behavior is like that huge Clydesdale horse who is suddenly spooked by a sound and runs straight for the hills without a bridle at a full gallop with you holding onto its mane for dear life. How often do you know what you should do or what needs to happen, but you find yourself misguided by your emotions and stuck in a place you don't want to be because you don't have control over what you do? Control starts with admitting and identifying what causes you to become derailed. Control starts with empowering yourself by ripping off your old self and putting on your new identity. Control starts with new habits that will get you a step closer to who you want to be. Control starts with rewiring your mind and making your goals concrete on paper and eventually in the business. The first decision of your day as you lace up your boots is to put that bridle into the horse's mouth by writing out your goals. If you don't, the horse, your emotions, will go wherever it wants to go. As my grandpa used to say, are you controlling that horse, or is that horse controlling you? The answer to that question will dictate where you go in life.
How do you like the book so far? If you like the book, please share it by texting the link to your friends, advisors, local family businesses, and most importantly, your family. Let's turn stubborn from a bad word into a good thing for family-owned businesses. Chapter 5. Health. Everyone's long-term health. A successful succession.
I have a 36-year-old friend named Molly who had been in a relationship with her boyfriend Jack for 8 years, and for the past 7 years they shared a house together. The house was in Jack's name, who had bought it 2 years before they started dating, but they split the mortgage and all household expenses evenly. Over the last 5 years, her father started to question why Jack hadn't produced an engagement ring. Initially he liked Jack, but he was starting to question if this young man was just using his daughter, or if he had honorable intentions. Jack started to joke to friends when he was pressed on this matter. Why buy the cow when the milk is free? When Molly's dad heard rumors of Jack saying that, it was a red flag for narcissism, and evidence that maybe the parents actually had legitimate concerns about their daughter's well-being both financially and emotionally. Over the last 3 years, they started to notice Molly's frustration, confusion, depressive moods, and anxiety about the future. Molly was annoyed because she had put a lot of time into the relationship, hoping it would get more serious, but it hadn't. After 5 years of hinting at a ring, it felt like it would never happen. With that, the motivation and effort she had brought to the relationship in the early stages began to dwindle as time went on. After 2 years of putting the pressure on, Jack's lack of commitment made Molly doubt herself and her abilities, and even doubt they had a relationship at all. She came into the relationship believing there would eventually be a concrete commitment, and with it not happening, she found herself spiraling into depression. She wondered why Jack wouldn't commit, and what it meant for them, her future family, and the future she hoped to have. And then, as he kept avoiding the subject, resentment and anger started to build up, and eventually a complete lack of trust developed. If you were Molly or her parents, would you have similar concerns or feelings? I know I would. Now take those same concerns and put them into a whole different context. Let's say the context of a son or daughter who has been working on the farm or in the family business for over 10 years, where there is no succession plan, and the parents refuse to discuss it. Molly's concerns are exactly their concerns: a failure to commit to the relationship. This uncertain future for successors of a family business is causing a multitude of problems in the business, in their personal family lives, and in their emotional and mental health. More than 75% of family farms do not have a succession plan, and it's a very similar statistic for most family businesses in most industries. For a lot of sons and daughters, this leaves a lot of successors feeling that they are walking on quicksand because they are uncertain what the future of the business is for them and what their stake in the business looks like. For a lot of families, bringing up the topic of succession planning is an explosive topic, and family tensions get worse around this discussion the closer a patriarch or matriarch is to death's door. There are a lot of farms where the son or daughter have worked on the farm and tripled its size over 30 years, only to have their parents divide the business's assets equally, or nearly equally, between farming and non-farming siblings. Many successors were informally told by their father that if you work here, the farm will someday be yours. It is never as clear-cut as that. Like Molly, you can't live with just a pinky swear as a form of commitment. You need a ring on your finger and paperwork signed. This uncertainty is causing a lot of tension within farming households and is a leading factor in the skyrocketing divorce rate for family-owned business owners. Early on in my career, I was in a tense family meeting and saw a wife angrily yell this to her husband in front of her in-laws in the midst of a family mediation.
You are 37 years old and have been working for pennies for your father for over 15 years. With the amount you work, you could have been making over $100,000 a year for the last decade, working in a career off the farm. But instead, you have only been paid $44,000 and worked twice as many hours. We live in a house and drive a truck owned by the corporation. We have no assets outside of this farm. Your dad had cancer when you were 22, and that is why you didn't finish your tool and die apprenticeship. If you didn't help your dad for those years that he was feeling sick, he would have been forced to retire and the cows would have been sold. You've tripled the farm's land base over the last 15 long years. Land values have tripled over that time. Yet, when has your dad ever said that you've done a good job? Huh? Tell me. You constantly complain about his lack of appreciation and respect for what you've done around here. Why are you still putting up with this? Your dad refuses to do succession planning and refuses to show you his will. I'm guessing he doesn't even have one, and is afraid to accept the fact that someday he is going to die. You have 3 siblings, and they all expect to get an equal share of the business, despite the fact that your siblings haven't put in an honest day's work on the farm since they were teenagers. Your mom says that if she gets the farm, that it is all being split up between the siblings. I love you, and you are the most common sense man I know, but this is freaking crazy. Why should we wait until you are 55 for your mom to pass and find out that we have to borrow money to buy your sister's shares out of the business? With the inflation on land values, there is no way the farm can cash flow buying your sister out and taking on that debt. It isn't realistic to burden our kids over 30 years with that debt. We'd be screwing over their futures by agreeing to this. Why should we have to work every Sunday to milk these cows if your sister Jenny hasn't set foot in that barn over the last 20 years? Why should we make sacrifices today for her to be able to buy a luxury cruise in a decade? I love you, but if we don't have a succession plan by Christmas, I'm leaving this farm, and you can either come with me or not.
For farmers, everything that they love, ranging from their marriage, relationships with their kids, their parents, their career, and even having a home to live in is uncertain because there is no succession plan. This creates the inability to do any type of business planning because nobody knows the future. It makes it nearly impossible to get out of bed in the morning to go fix a combine if you don't know if you'll have to be buying that same combine at an estate sale. In our society, we spend a lot of time talking about the spin-off effects of emotional or mental health, ranging from depression to alcoholism to spousal abuse. But what about the actual culprits? What about the frustrations of working in a dysfunctional family business? What about the feeling of quicksand under our feet because there's no plan for the future? Dysfunctional business succession is an undiagnosed cancer that creates many evils. Even a decade after a messy estate planning battle has been settled, a farmer might hang himself, because when you delve into it, the estate plan had too high of a payout to non-farming siblings, and in tight times, the farm can't realistically cash flow the debt obligations the farmer is burdened with. I need to repeat here, farmers have the highest suicide rate, even higher than war veterans with PTSD who have returned from Iraq and Afghanistan. How messed up is that? USDA and extension agents will go around the countryside making speeches about agriculture's big mental health crisis because farmers are stressed by the challenges of unpredictable weather and commodity markets. But the real anxiety most farmers face is the uncertainty of what their stake is in the business they are investing their lives in building.
Transparency makes the future more certain.
Think about this. If you went off to a software company and you worked there 60 hours a week for 3 years and had good performance evaluations, that company would give you a stock option plan. That's because they want to keep good managers around, hopefully for the life of the company, and give them the opportunity to grow with it. We need this in agriculture up front, not waiting until the son or daughter are in their 40s and have compensation based on entitlement. To have a motivated individual, they need to believe they are earning their future. Sitting around and waiting for someone to die, saying in a will, "I love you more, so here is more capital," is the breeding grounds for both a dysfunctional business and a miserable family Christmas. There needs to be a clear-cut path for a fair business partnership whereby the successor knows that if they work hard to build the value of a company, they will be fairly compensated for their efforts and sacrifices in the end. As the successor works more hours in the business, they should fairly earn more shares in the business. Instead of being focused on splitting the pie, your successor should be focused on growing the business. As they increase the size of the pie, A portion of that capital should be theirs not out of entitlement, but because they earned it. As the size of the pie increases, it also benefits the elder shareholders because they get a slice of the growth. The same as a startup entrepreneur benefits from giving options to managers who increase her share price over a decade. Thus, there is more for everyone to eat because of business growth. Instead of fighting over shares, we should be focusing on sharing in a way that's fair to everyone involved. Steve Jobs would still be operating out of his garage if he simply paid his managers a salary. For some reason, the principles of capitalism aren't being applied to family-owned businesses like family farms, and it's creating a communist mindset in how successors operate day to day. How can you not expect someone to not act entitled if that is the business model? Never forget the principles of capitalism. American agriculture was proven to be 10 times more effective than communist Russian agriculture systems back in the 1970s because farmers owned a stake in the business and cared about results. However, because succession planning is being delayed by 20 years due to modern farmer longevity, it's screwing up the mindset of the next generation of managers who are now no longer willing to make sacrifices for 2 more decades until mom and dad both pass away. Today's young farmers are tempted to adopt an entitled, union workers mindset. Successful startup businesses issue stock to managers early so that their future managers act like owners early in the game, not just overpaid employees with an entitled, Marxist attitude. If you have a son or daughter who act as employees for 20 years saying, "Once I get more ownership, then I'll change my performance," they won't. Bad habits and incorrect belief systems are formed over time and hard to change. This is why tech companies issue stock option plans as soon as possible, once potential managers have proven themselves, and why we see these companies realize high rates of growth and success. Like an employee getting a stock option plan, your family needs to have a simple 2-page agreement about how, if successors work on growing the business over the next 30 years, they are going to earn a growing percentage of the company's shares in proportion to their effort. It needs to be spelled out. It needs to be clear and transparent. Kill the uncertainty by making the future certain. If I work more hours than my sibling, how am I going to earn more? Yes, there are tax issues with a stock option plan instead of just being gifted equity in a will, but they can be worked around by any accountant worth his salt, even if it means issuing non-voting shares which become voting stock after a parent's funeral. The main thing is to have a written understanding in principle between all family members that is transparent with both non-farming and farming siblings. If daughter Mary works in this business, what percentage of the business is she entitled to in her inheritance, and what percentage is she earning because she is working inside of the business to grow and expand it? What happens if she works twice as many hours as her brother Joseph to grow the company? How is this contribution fairly and objectively measured?
Trusting the successor makes the future more certain.
Now let's address the other half of the succession equation. Yes, successors deserve a fair and transparent plan for their future, but so do mom and dad, who, in their right mind, would hand over their entire life savings and legacy to someone they can't trust. They have spent their lifetime building and growing the business, with a substantial amount of their capital, if not all of it, still tied up in the assets of the business. There is no way that their lifetime savings should be handed over to someone they feel is not competent. Successors must first prove themselves to be worthy of being a steward of the family's wealth that took generations to build up. They shouldn't become a partner involved in the management of the business unless they have first proven themselves to be a partner who any non-relative would hire. You must first prove to your family that they are lucky to have you, not that you are in the lucky sperm club, and you are only getting this opportunity because you are lucky enough to be born into this family. Just like it's not common sense to get married on a first date, I don't think that it makes sense to draft a partnership agreement or produce an option plan for a successor in their first year in the business. The average couple dates for about 30 months or just over 2.5 years before engagement. Like dating, I think that is a reasonable time frame for a probationary period for a son or daughter or in-law to work for a business to see if the son or daughter enjoys the nature of the business and has the work ethic and skills to be partnership material. My rule of thumb is 9,000 paid hours, which usually looks like 3 years after they graduate college. Like being tested to see if you are this tall to get on the ride, to become a family business partner, a spouse, a son, or a daughter needs to be evaluated to see if they are marriage material for the business. Would they be a partner and friend anyone would want to work with over 30 years or not? Just like dating, you should have strict criteria for whether your family member would make a good business partner or not. For me, I think the litmus test is in 4 questions that follow the same process this book outlines. Let me list them here. Head. Can I make decisions with this person? Or is it always going to be a head-butting contest? Heart. Are they narcissistic and do they care about the well-being of everyone? Hands. Are they pointing fingers or trying to self-improve the faults that they have? Health. Are they focused on instant gratification or making disciplined decisions for the long-term good of the family? In 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years' time, you can think of the 4H analogy, head, heart, hands, and health, to recall and pose these questions to not only your partners, but yourself. Are you being the partner or friend anyone would want to be partnered with? 4H is not about the kid being perfect and winning trophies on their first day. It's about the process of self-improvement. No boyfriend or girlfriend is perfect, and everyone needs work. It's the same with family-owned businesses. All parents at one time or another will have fleeting thoughts of, why can't he be more like that guy or she be more like her? Being ungrateful for what you were blessed with because of some bad days will blind you to the good days and to the potential that they have. It is important to not throw the baby out with the bathwater and to give a person time to personally grow and improve themselves. During a 3-year period of a family, using the processes outlined within this book, both parents and successors should easily be able to answer those 4 questions posed above. If they are not marriage material, then just like a romantic relationship, it is important to break up civilly, yet still be friends. Just like dating, it's a lot less messy to stop working with a family member as a business partner after just a few years, rather than after a full decade when the relationship is not working out.
You're fired, at least for now.
Through this process, you might have to fire a son or a daughter, permanently or temporarily. If in the performance review process, parents write down that the successor is to show up to work at no later than 5 a.m. to milk cows, and they disrespect this feedback, showing up whenever they want, you might have to fire them. Your family must be firm in your expectation to seek continuous improvement, or they will never become the successors that you can trust to manage your family's investments. You must prioritize killing any sense of entitlement. Entitlement is a hard nut to crack. This may look like a period of several years working someplace else. Many times, a strong sense of entitlement can't be broken if left within the environment that it grew out of. Working someplace else, living someplace else, and having no benefits from the farm can bring a needed reality check. The experience of a son or daughter having to go work somewhere else for 2 years will often give them the mindset changes and experiences that will enable them to be successful in the long term in a way your family can't teach them. Yes, it might be inconvenient to have to hire 2 employees to replace what your daughter is already trained to do. But if you don't do this, then she'll always be doing a half-assed job and your empire will eventually implode. When your son or daughter does come back, they will need to understand that the performance review process is still on the table. The same 4 acid test questions mentioned in this chapter need to be answered before any succession talk or stock option plan can be made. If they haven't learned to self-improve based on their performance review process, firing them again is still an option, permanently or temporarily. This cycle might have to be done several times until the successor has matured enough to become a partner. It might be a decade until you have a worthy successor, but then you'll have a worthy successor.
Quitting is also an option.
Equally, a son or daughter might have to quit if a parent or sibling fails to continuously improve themselves. If the farm is the center of their identity, this might be the toughest thing they have to do in their life. However, if the business's culture continues to enable entitled and narcissistic attitudes whereby partners do whatever feels good and whatever they want, it is going to create a living hell nobody wants to be part of in the long term. If your family uses the process outlined in this book, then why a family member quits is not a mystery but rather clearly validated. Those partners who refuse to self-improve won't invent their own reasons and rationalize excuses. They know objectively how they messed up and what they have to do to fix the relationship. Those certain habit changes that never happen make it clear that a potential partner was not serious about being a partner anyone would want to work with. The onus then falls on them to apologize and change their behavior. If they choose not to, would they ever have been a partner you'd want to work with?
Fear of losing control.
As stated at the beginning of this book, Working with parents is no longer a 5-year apprenticeship, but it's often a 20-plus year partnership because parents are living longer. The period that you are in a partnership with your family isn't like a high school fling. It is a long-term marriage. Parents need to stop saying, "I'm going to retire in 5 years," because it's likely a lie. They might even believe it when they say it, but 90% of the time this never happens because secretly most successful businessmen and women enjoy the challenges of work. You might want to be able to get away for longer vacations and more often, but you still need a reason to get out of bed in the morning. Most family business owners want to stay in the game and not die depressed and without anything to do except watch Fox News for 12 hours a day on the couch. We need to recognize that we are in a long-term partnership. I understand many parents are afraid to issue stock in a company for fear of losing majority control of the company. This can easily be overcome by issuing non-voting shares that convert to voting stock after someone's funeral. However, the bigger issue that is emphasized throughout this book is that your family needs to build relationships whereby it doesn't matter who owns more shares on a piece of paper in your farm's office safe. What matters is that the right decisions get made and that everyone's viewpoint counts regardless of percentage of stock ownership. What should matter is your faith that the right decisions get made, not an obsession with always having to be right. Instead of running the business based on fear of losing control, your family needs to become obsessed with being able to make quality decisions together as a team and building the successor's character by getting rid of narcissistic mindsets so that you can trust them to always do what is good for the family. If you do this, then Grandpa's advice is always going to be wanted by successors when making business decisions, regardless of what percentage of the company's ownership he has. Only 23% of family farms have a succession plan, but what few lawyers will openly admit to is that the vast majority of these cases are actually hostile takeovers that are window-dressed as succession plans. Ask any lawyer. The dark side of succession planning is that of the 23% of family businesses that do get a succession deal papered, most succession deals resemble stealing Dad's car at gunpoint rather than passing over the keys to the car at prom. If that is the case, then most business owners do not feel welcome on the farm and are definitely not involved in business decisions once the ink is dry on these deals. By first learning to listen to each other and everyone being a better version of themselves prior to the talk, you are going to be welcome on the farm and your input will be wanted. This is regardless of what percentage of the company's stock you own. You're not going to feel like a backseat driver or fighting over the steering wheel for control. The importance or value of this is hard to quantify, but let me ask you this. Do you think the patriarch in your family wants to die wearing a pair of slippers and sitting in a lazy boy couch or die with his work boots on? Even if he is feeble, wouldn't it mean a lot to him for his opinion to be respected and for him to feel part of the business until the day he dies, instead of feeling pushed out? How much is that worth to a proud patriarch in the big picture of things?
When it's time for the talk.
After the potential successor has worked on their family's farm for 3 years and went through the performance review process successfully, the successor has earned the time for the talk to happen. This talk about long-term plans may or may not be what he or she hoped or expected. More than once, I have seen terms that were laid out that the successor could not agree with. For instance, parents might expect the successor to pay out non-farming siblings, pay heavily to charities, or just buy mom's dream home in Hawaii at a rate that the successor doesn't think is realistic. This is better to know now than 20 years from now. There are a lot of farmers who are forced into succession deals where they must buy out parents and siblings at rates that the farm can't cash flow. And then a decade later, when the farm goes bankrupt, they bear the shame of the empire failing, when in fact, it was the unrealistic estate plan's fault. If it's a bad deal that isn't going to result in your grandchildren farming someday, then it's better to walk away after only investing 3 years into the business than after 30 years of indentured servitude. It's better to walk away early than have the eventual shame of losing a family business that took generations to build. Not everyone who gets issued a stock option plan at a company that they worked at for 3 years chooses to take that plan and earn those shares under those terms for the next 20 years. During this discussion, if it is found that no one can agree with what they think is fair, then move on to the next career. The son or daughter can look at their time on the farm or family business as a step in their career and just look back saying, "I love my family, but we found out over the 3 years I worked there that we just wouldn't be good partners together." This is a practical way that you can have family Christmas together if working together doesn't work out. As a guy who doesn't get together with his dad for Christmas because of the unexpected dysfunction that nobody could have predicted, I cannot explain to you how much I wish I could have a do-over.
Over 30 and still no plan.
So how does this 3-year performance review apply to families where the successor has been involved in the business for over a decade? This lack of a plan, as discussed at the beginning of this chapter, is a huge problem that causes a multitude of frustrations and dysfunctional partnerships. It has many times destroyed families and farms. When working with farm families who are in desperate need of a plan, I am adamant at making sure to apply the same principles within this book first, usually over 2 years. During these 2 years, the family works on 3 of the 4 H's as listed. Head, improving the family's ability to make decisions together as a team. Heart, improving the business culture so that everyone has a team player, not narcissist, mentality. Hands, evolving everyone's character so that they become the partner and friend anyone can work with. Once you've dealt with these 3, then you can deal with the last H, health or long-term longevity issues of the farm by addressing your family's succession strategy. If there is an emergency issue like grandpa having cancer, you might have to fast-track the talk at 6 months into using this process instead of 24 months, but I would try to stick to this process as much as possible. You need to learn to listen to each other better first. By addressing the head, heart, and hand aspect of the 4H analogy first, the health of the family business conversation will be easier. Then when your family first has the talk, this meeting is a pleasant 3-hour conversation which turns into a signed agreement and pleasant working relationship going forward instead of a negative interaction, which turns into World War III within your family over the next decade. You've got to fix the stubborn first.
Chapter 6. Conclusion. Focus on what matters.
Entitlement refers to the belief that one is inherently deserving of certain privileges or advantages without necessarily having earned them. Entitlement kills family farms, business partnerships, and marriages. When you're born on a farm and every day go out to feed cows, it is difficult to imagine that barn empty. Just the same, it's impossible to imagine never speaking to your dad or never getting together with your uncle for Christmas. It's almost like trying to imagine a day the sun doesn't rise. When you come from a successful family-owned business and have a successful family dynamic everyone in the community envies, it's something we all take for granted. Entitlement blinds us until it's too late. Nobody gets married or goes into a partnership with a jerk, but everyone gets divorced from one. We don't know how many people are actually happy in their marriages or business partnerships, but I do know that it's a lot less than what is portrayed on Facebook and Instagram. Through raw statistics, we know that nearly half of our society's marriages end up in divorce. This is not due to bliss but frustration. It is hard to guess as to how many sons or daughters leave a family business out of frustration, because most of the time the family spins a positive face about a son or daughter getting an exciting opportunity outside of the business, when the truth is they are leaving the business due to frustrations. I'll let you judge this for yourself, but I know that within my agriculture college class reunion, almost everyone was keen to go home to join the family business, and at our 25-year class reunion, only a handful remained involved in the business. I'd say it's very similar to divorce statistics, but instead of leaving a spouse, they are leaving the family business, which is equally as painful. Nobody would tell a statistician doing a door-to-door survey the honest truth about how good either their marriage or business partnership is really going. Nobody has an accurate statistic of how many married couples and how many family business owners are truly happy behind closed doors. Certainly, you might see a family business win a prestigious industry award and be all smiles on the front page of a magazine, but are they really happy behind closed doors? Or do they have more bad days than good days and are miserable? Do they think of divorce often? The one statistic that I know is that 12% of family farms pass over from grandma to grandchildren. I am only guessing, but I believe that less than 12% of marriages and business partnerships are truly happy on the majority of days. It's not a majority, it's a slim minority. To be successful, you have to realize that you aren't entitled, and think like an underdog. We have a skyrocketing mental health crisis in most family businesses right now, and a big underlying factor that is causing this crisis is the lack of solid marriages or close family relationships caused by stressful business partnerships. Obviously, a divorce or failed partnership is going to lead to financial ruin. On almost every metric that you can think of, this issue has a deep and very negative impact on the success and happiness of everyone's lives. There is no win-win, it's all a loss. Hubris is when someone has excessive pride or arrogance, thinking they are better or more important than they really are. It often leads them to make poor decisions because they underestimate the consequences of their actions. In simple terms, It's like having a big ego that blinds you to your own flaws and limits. We get into partnerships with either spouses or family thinking that it's going to be happily ever after, only to be disappointed a decade later that it's not working out the way it should be. As I said earlier, entitlement kills both marriages and business partnerships. There are many reasons given for a divorce, but I believe the root issues come down to the 4 H's that we laid down throughout this book. Head, we butt heads, becoming obsessed with winning an argument at all costs. Heart, we stop caring about the needs of others, only prioritizing our own selfish needs. Hands, we point fingers at each other and never reflect on our own role in the problem. Health, we make decisions based on instant gratification, not thinking about the long-term consequences of decisions for the long-term success of the business or family relationships. We refuse to accept that someday we'll die and not care about others' needs beyond that point. These are instances where we are the wrong type of stubborn. This is what causes both marriages and family businesses to fail. Issues like adultery, causing the breakup of a marriage, or a partner not being trustworthy are side effects of these root evils. If your family isn't hyper-focused on the few factors that lead to success, there are many, many distractions that will lead to failure. To achieve success and happiness, you need to become the right type of stubborn. I got into a car accident and had a piece of glass in my eye. I went to the emergency room and the doctor put my head into what was essentially a vice grip and started poking into my eye with a pair of tweezers. The young doctor made the comment that he had only done such an action once when he was an intern, and the way he was poking around my eyeball, I realized that Larry the cable guy would have been equally qualified. It took everything I had to not punch him. Yet if I didn't have the self-discipline to let the doctor help me take the glass out, I would probably be blind today. In that moment, I had to choose to be the right type of stubborn. In the same way, in this moment you must choose to be the right type of stubborn, which can mean this. Head, you need to stop butting heads with each other and learn to make decisions together as a team. It doesn't matter who is right, what matters is the right decision gets made. Heart, you need to stop being narcissistic and care for the needs of others, not just yourself. Hands, you need to stop pointing fingers and look at the 3 fingers pointing back at you. Instead of controlling others, you need to change your own behavior and self-improve first. Health, you need to start making all decisions with a long-term perspective. This might mean getting comfortable with the concept that you aren't going to live forever and that life goes on without you. You need to prioritize others' well-being, not just your own. The principles of this book have been about how to change these 4 root problems to shift the trajectory of both your business partnership and marriage. Although they are common sense, they aren't things we think about often, yet they impact several of the things we care about most. The only way that you'll actually make changes in your life is when you stop taking success for granted and adopt an underdog mentality. You need to approach your relationships with a sense of humility, not entitlement. We need to focus on what matters. We need to be stubborn in all the right things.
With a sense of humility.
The problem with our society is that we enter into relationships, business or personal, with a sense of entitlement and pride instead of humility. We get focused on distractions of the moment instead of focusing on what matters. Think about the pomp and circumstance that goes into a wedding. We get more obsessed about having a memorable reception over a few hours to impress our friends and get great photos. But within a few days, we forget to remember the true meaning of what the ceremony meant. One of my hobbies was officiating weddings. I've married 42 of my friends. I had a lot of friends in college, and there was a period when I was getting invited to at least 12 weddings a year. I didn't get married until I was 42. In my 20s, I thought I would have a big show for a wedding and have a couple hundred guests. My friends got into a competition with each other over who could have the biggest wedding, and the last guy spent over $100,000 on a wedding, which was over the top. When I got married to Bernadette at 42, I didn't invite 95% of the friends I should have. We only had 20 guests each, and our budget was only $2,000 for the whole shindig. I knew I didn't want our wedding to be a competition, but a real example of what we both wanted our relationship to be like until death do us part. As part of the ceremony, I insisted on having a particular Anabaptist tradition I believed to be invaluable. The priest thought it was a bit odd for a Roman Catholic wedding ceremony, but I insisted on washing each other's feet as Jesus once did. Although I think of Bernadette as darn close to perfect as you can get, I am far from a perfect husband and am definitely a flawed individual. I couldn't tell you what color our flowers were at the wedding, but I always remember washing her feet and the importance of being humble. This has really changed the outcome of our relationship, and it's only the times we faltered in our relationship that we forgot to remember this. I've done a lot of foolish things in my life, but one of the wisest things I did was get married with a sense of humility. We don't have the perfect marriage, but I can tell you it has exceeded everyone's expectations, including mine, and having a good marriage is the one thing I'm most grateful for. I believe that for any relationship to be successful, it's being humble and subservient, not overly proud, that makes the relationship work. And for you to have a partnership you can be truly proud of. The advice I've given you in this book isn't just words, but what I truly believe. When you get married, your priorities shift because now you have a partner to consider in almost every decision you make. Instead of just thinking about yourself, you also have to think about your spouse and their needs. You might find yourself making compromises and working together to plan for the future. Your focus may move towards building a strong and loving relationship, sharing responsibilities, and supporting each other emotionally and financially. It's about creating a life together where you both feel happy, secure, and connected. And that often means adjusting your individual priorities to align with your shared goals and dreams. For most business partnerships, there is no wedding ceremony. But a business partnership is like a marriage just the same because you are committing yourself to a long-term relationship, and the quality of that partnership will impact the happiness and success of your life. Like a marriage, in order for the relationship to be successful, your priorities need to shift to look out for the good of everyone, not just yourself. You will need to make sacrifices and make tough decisions to do hard things in the moment to have a happier life together. You must set aside your pride and egos in order to create family relationships and a family business you can truly be proud of. This requires you to always be focused on what matters. Keep family first.
Get hyper-focused.
Consider Elon Musk and what energizes him, colonializing Mars prior to his death. He might portray an image in the media that he is erratic, but he has become successful because he has been hyper-focused on doing a few things right. He's obsessed with the use of his time, and it would be a challenge for anyone to help him be more efficient with the use of his time. I don't think this is a function of his obsession with time management, but more importantly, his obsession with what ultimately matters to him. He is choosing to be stubborn for what matters to him and won't let anything distract him, even for 5 minutes. Every opportunity that comes his way, he evaluates whether that is going to get him closer to his mission of setting foot on Mars or not. If it isn't, he doesn't have time for it. He is very stubborn at expending all his limited energy on the things that matter most to him. Whether you agree or disagree with his motives and choices, you've got to admire his focus. The first piece of land I recommend every farmer should buy is their gravesite. Not the farm next door or a big house in town, but the soil where eventually he or she is going to become soil. But not just his or her gravesite, but enough plots for their entire family in that little country cemetery a few miles away from the family farm. Like Elon Musk, I want that son or daughter to get hyper-focused on what they want to accomplish in their lifetime. I want the whole family to get hyper-focused. You are all probably going to the same graveyard someday. What do you want to do with your limited time together on Earth? When you make decisions not based on where you are standing, but where you are eventually going and the legacy you want for your life, it changes everything. A big part of that is what you do with your family and your career. What is the vision of the business that you want, and what legacy do you want to leave for future generations? What do you want your marriage to be like? Do you just want a gravestone to show for your life's work, or do you want your great-grandchildren to have the same opportunity for the same type of childhood your grandpa gave you? Do you want to get the instant gratification of taking your anger out on a family member in the moment, or be stubborn at being your best self and be a person they mourn after your death? How do you create not only a family empire, but groom successors so that your legacy is going and growing 50 years past your funeral? How do you live a life that truly matters? If you don't divorce, you are likely to be buried 10 feet from your spouse and close family members that you are in a business partnership with. The questions you should ask yourself are, how can you enjoy being in similar proximity to each other when you are alive, not just dead? How do you create the family culture and be the partner and friend anyone would want to be with? What would you give your life for? That should be what you dedicate your life to do. To accomplish this, we can't just assume that we will be buried beside our spouse or that our family will attend our funeral. We can't take these relationships for granted and let entitlement take hold, but instead approach them with humility and prioritize them. We need to be the right type of stubborn 24/7. There are a lot of fathers who claim they'd sacrifice their lives for their children, yet day to day they don't make any such sacrifices. They act in a narcissistic manner, putting their needs first. This is why divorce courts are so full. Many men only fight for the privilege of being with their kids after their kids are gone. If the men who spent $50,000 on divorce lawyers had placed similar effort on spending time being good fathers to their kids prior to their spouse leaving them, would they be in divorce court at all? Divorce courts are full because spouses chose the easy thing in the moment that will bring instant gratification, not the hard thing that will bring ultimate happiness. They weren't the right type of stubborn. Nearly 95% of farm bankruptcy auctions aren't caused by a drought or low commodity prices. Just like 95% of divorce cases aren't caused by adultery or irreconciled differences. Those might be the factors that are the nail in the coffin, but the root issues are the decade prior to that moment when you took things for granted, where you invested your time and money foolishly on things that don't matter. When you didn't focus on what matters and daily you weren't realizing your fullest potential. When you chose instant gratification instead of making sacrifices to be stubborn at doing the right thing. What type of stubborn do you choose to be? This is what separates the wheat from the chaff.
Reactive versus proactive.
Recently, I spoke to a larger family farm where they cash cropped 14,000 acres. The grandsons heard me speak at their college and wanted to bring me in to evolve how they work together. But the 82-year-old patriarch was abrasive to any suggestions, or that his family even had problems. I told him that he had gone from farming 300 acres to 14,000 acres in his lifetime because he was proactive in how he approached problems. Several of his neighbors failed at farming because they would have foreseeable breakdowns mid-spring and then unable to plant their crop on time. They reacted to problems instead of anticipating and proactively correcting problems like he did. This patriarch went over his equipment with a fine-tooth comb over the winter and identified any potential problems before the spring, upgrading any equipment that could break down well before it did. He identified potential problems and tried to fix them before they became a real problem. The principles outlined in this book is in line with the same common-sense philosophy. Anything you can do to eliminate potential frustrations is going to make working with family better in times that are easy, and more importantly in times that are stressful. Proactively fixing problems instead of sticking your head in the sand is just plain common sense. Throughout this book, I spoke to you about a few dark client cases that might seem extreme, but in these cases they are still farming today and are happy because they chose to be the right type of stubborn. Nearly 14 months after Sadie had that tragic day when she slit her wrists, she had a baby which she named Norman after her father-in-law. It's now awesome to see that boy running around the farm working and playing with his grandpa. Every time I think about those two, it gives me purpose to my job. However, there have been other farmers who have chosen to make excuses to not be the right type of stubborn, and this has led to some very tragic endings I hope you never experience. For instance, just this spring, a farmer called me up to spend hours complaining about the fact that his sons didn't communicate or get enough work done around the farm, yet he refused to develop the habit of doing a 10-minute phone call with his partners at the end of each day. Because he refused to change, yet expected everyone else to do so, his son quit, and he hasn't spoken to his grandchildren since. The patriarch's life has changed, but not for the better because he was the wrong type of stubborn. I can lead a horse to water, but I can't make it drink. After reading this book, there will be some who agree with the principles, but never have the grit to apply them, and tragically they won't be getting together for Christmas with family someday. You have to decide for yourself what type of person you are going to be, a victim or a success story. It's really that simple. I can't make that decision for you. You have to decide and do this for yourself. To say you are going to make one simple change to who you are this month is easy to say, but it is hard to actually do. It takes discipline. To do this doesn't just take you saying something, but meaning it. To do this, you have to shift your identity and to look at anything that gets in the way of who you want to become with the same self-defense as someone coming to cut your heart out of your chest. Do you choose to be the worst version of yourself? Choose instant gratification? And choose to be the wrong kind of stubborn in how you deal with your spouse and your family business partners? Or are you stubborn with yourself to do the right thing, especially when it is hard? When there is an excuse to do something easier, but you choose to be stubborn because you know in the long term it's the right thing to do. When it's easy to be negative and reactionary, but you chose to be your better self in that moment, are you stubborn with your family, or are you stubborn with yourself to be the best person you can be?
Final words.
I'm the seventh generation farm boy from a little town called Caygeon, Ontario, Canada. Love is not a strong enough word for how much I feel about where I am from. It's the prettiest little nook in the world, and it's part of me. Everyone since college has called me Caygeon because I told everyone about my proud family's history of how my ancestors cleared our farm back in 1832 and how I was going to continue that family legacy. I grew up being told that my ancestor had died so that I could have the right to farm. I found out the hard way that nobody has the right to farm or continue a family business. It's a rare privilege. You might have a proud family history, but humility is what is required to have a farm and a family to be proud of. With 70% of family farms, there is a successor who is interested in taking over the family legacy, and there is a similar statistic for most family-owned businesses in most industries. Yet only 12% are successful in passing over grandma's farm to their grandchildren, and I hate to admit to you that because of our narcissism, entitlement, and stubbornness, my family became a statistic. I left Caygeon and officially took the middle name Caygeon. As a way to stay committed to my life mission that I learned on that barn beam, I left Ontario with the goal to help as many farm families worldwide as possible. I won't let myself have the privilege of going back to Caygeon until my boys spread my ashes and I become part of the soil. I now live in a log cabin on a little homestead in eastern Iowa. I have 3 boys. The oldest is only 5. Huckleberry, Samuel Colt, and Scout, with another boy coming this Thanksgiving. My best friend, Hillbilly, died 2 years ago from Lou Gehrig's disease, and he left behind 2 boys who were just 13 and 12 at the time. On his deathbed, I offered to help him engrave a few precious words onto a jackknife and inside of an engraved wallet that would steer his boys on the right path as they walked through life. Picking the right words was tough to do. What words can you say to a boy that will change the trajectory of his life? Hillbilly taught me not just to be grateful to be alive each day, but to be stubborn on myself to set the right example and instill good values into my boys with whatever time I have left. Every day I carry a jackknife engraved with, "Be the man you want your boys to become." This mantra has changed my behavior, ranging from consistently getting out of bed at 4 a.m. to how I speak to their mother. Hillbilly's death caused me to realize that I could be gone at any moment. Over the last 2 years, I've wrestled with what words of wisdom that I can leave behind for my boys, and this is what led me to write this book. I have bought each one of my boys a matching belt buckle for when they get older, and I'm not here to tell them the words I hope will change the trajectory of their lives. On the back it says, "Easy decisions, hard life, hard decisions, easy life. Be the right type of stubborn." My only hope for my sons is that they learn to be the right type of stubborn. And that is the hope I have for you, starting this moment. A big thank you for taking the time to listen to the end. If you like the ideas in this book and want to take the first step to apply them to your business, but don't know how, just go to my website, www.stubborn.farm. I have a detailed PDF for you to download that makes it really easy for you and your family to get started on this process on your own. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen, and if you can think of a friend who could benefit from this book, be sure to take a few seconds and text it to that friend. I look forward to reading your review of this book on Amazon. Your review can be huge in increasing the probability that the lives of other hardworking families that we don't know will be transformed, and they will happily get together for Christmas in a decade. I hope this book changes your life for the better. You take care and God bless.